In this kingdom, magical power was the ultimate status symbol, and the high-ranking nobles were absolutely obsessed with it. And believe me, the legendary House of Eldorado was definitely no exception to that rule. Crow, the Eldorado family's second-born, stood tense before the high priest while clutching a pulsing magical orb, but his jaw hit the floor the second the priest revealed exactly what kind of powers he was packing. He's rocking the ultimate power combo, God-tier appraisal and broken alchemy. Flashback a few hours to when they were still rattling along in that horse-drawn carriage. Crow sat dead still by the window, his mind absolutely racing as he plotted his next move. His loyal butler Seabass was worried sick, but he finally breathed a massive sigh of relief once he saw Crow was back on his feet. Seabass dropped a quick reminder. The second they stepped foot in the capital, they're heading straight for the Elder Church. When Crow asked about his dad, Seabass revealed that the Count was already at the church, waiting for his arrival. Right then, the sheer gravity of the situation finally started to sink in for Crow. His heart hammered against his ribs as it hit him. The moment he'd been waiting for was finally here. In this world, the moment you hit 12, you're hauled off to the church to finally awaken the skill that'll define your entire life. Plus, they were born with insane magical gifts, and no two powers were ever the same. Being a noble, the pressure was on for Crow to awaken a high-tier combat skill to defend his territory and serve the crown. But the absolute prizes everyone craved were the 4 legendary elements: fire, water, wind, and earth. His big brother Hawk was a straight-up fire-wielding beast, hailed as the ultimate genius over at the Magic Academy. Then there's his brother All, who mastered wind enhancement magic to supercharge his body and absolutely dominate the youth sword circuits as a reigning champ. With his elite bloodline, Crow was dead certain he'd land a top-tier combat skill, hopefully the strongest one out there. But his daydreams were cut short when Seabass shouted that the royal capital was finally on the horizon, making him bolt upright, and he gazed out at the colossal walls and skyscraping towers of the capital city, Bellfire. He was completely blown away, and man, it definitely lived up to every bit of its legendary title. His heart was pounding as he stared at the massive temple, dying to see what kind of legendary power he was about to get his hands on. Finally, the big moment arrived at Erdal's shrine, and his fate was laid bare for the whole world to see. But the second they announced appraisal and alchemy, the entire room went dead silent, and you could practically feel the shock in the air. One of the nobles started losing his cool, trashing the skills as total junk since appraisal was a complete mystery to them, and he mocked alchemy as nothing more than a crutch for weak mages to cook up basic potions. He's desperately fighting to keep the chaos from spiraling out of control. He slides a fat pouch of gold over to the high priest, making it crystal clear that this stays off the record. Crow watches the whole thing from the sidelines in a total daze, completely stunned by what's unfolding. This was straight-up hush money, and his father's reaction confirmed Crow's absolute worst nightmares. Everyone looked at his skills like they were a total curse, leaving him drowning in shame as he moped behind Seabass and his dad, dragging his feet out of the shrine with the crushing weight of failure on his shoulders. His old man dipped out to handle some business in the capital, ordering the rest to head back while Seabass geared up for the long trek home to their territory. Cut back to the carriage as it rattles along the road home. The vibe on this ride was a total 180 from their last trip. The tension in the air was so thick you could practically choke on it. Finally, Seabass broke the silence, admitting he was seriously let down by Crow's lack of talent. He owned up to the struggle but insisted they keep their eyes locked on the future. Crow stayed totally chill, giving a nod of agreement that nobody saw coming. That level of ice-cold composure left Seabass absolutely stunned. Crow just watches Seabass's brain melt with a smug grin, knowing the old him would have folded under this pressure. But he's not that same guy anymore. Hidden deep inside him was a massive secret. He still remembered every single detail of his past life back in Japan. Right before they hit the royal capital, Crow is suddenly slammed by a brutal, mysterious headache. While Seabass rushes to his side in a panic, something inside Crow completely snaps. All at once, the floodgates open and Crow remembers every single detail of his past life before he was reincarnated. With those lost memories back in his head, his maturity level skyrockets instantly. Staring down at his own hands, the confusion finally melted away, as he realized that appraisal and alchemy weren't weak skills, they were absolute game changers. He realized appraisal was a total game changer, letting him see the true stats and value of any item he laid eyes on. The insane utility of a power like that wasn't lost on him for a single second. Riding that high, he wasted no time and dove headfirst into investigating alchemy next. The second he locked onto that thought, a massive wave of data slammed into his brain like a freight train. It was like a vault of forbidden knowledge had just been blown wide open. He realized alchemy wasn't just mixing stuff. It was the art of warping materials with pure mana to brew legendary potions. But this power went way deeper than just medicine, even if it lacked the flashy, destructive firepower of those elite elemental magics. Suddenly, Crow started seeing these guys in a completely different light. Sure, his talents wouldn't win him any fame or glory in the snobby world of high society. But when you look at things from a purely practical standpoint, they were absolute naturals when it came to running the estate. And that realization sparked a massive new fire in his heart. Instead of chasing the glory of a legendary knight, Crow decides to rebuild his home as a lord. And when he breaks the news to Seaboss, the old man is left speechless by just how much the kid has grown. Crow then turned on the charm, asking Seabase to throw his weight behind his brand new mission. Totally moved and seriously impressed, Sebastian didn't waste a single second before jumping on board. A month later, Crow stands tall and totally unfazed in his father's massive office, with Seabass and his second brother, Owl, backing him up. He paused for a heartbeat as the realization finally hit him. After the church ceremony wrapped up, his father dropped a massive bombshell by appointing Crow as the new lord of Nest Village, a remote backwater town stuck on the absolute edge of their territory. Crow was ready for a fight, but hearing Nest Village stopped him cold since that place is buried in the absolute middle of nowhere. Even so, he just took it all on the chin and accepted the burden without a single word of complaint. His old man was actually floored since he fully expected his son to put up a massive fight. They were totally floored by how obedient he was being. But Crow just kept his cool and thanked them from the bottom of his heart, explaining that his only goal was to serve the estate, and he was just hyped to stay on their land, where his skills could actually matter. Let's be real. Surviving the cutthroat world of nobles was basically a death sentence with his weak powers. But his raw honesty blew Seabass away, and even his prankster brother All was left totally speechless. Crow was secretly loving every second of this, because ditching the toxic noble politics meant he could finally cut loose and show what his skills are actually worth. Out on the wild frontier, he finally felt alive, building a brand new world with his own two hands. Even his old man was watching from the shadows, quietly blown away by how far his son had come. He flashed a subtle smirk and broke the news to Crow that Nest Village was... It sits right on the edge of the Demon's Forest, a total nightmare zone crawling with monsters. Knowing things were getting dangerous, Owl decided to stick by his side for a while, immediately sliding up to Crow and throwing a playful arm over his shoulder. He dumped the whole mission onto Crow's shoulders, leaving our guy blushing and totally caught off guard. He usually can't stand being babied, but that sincere warmth actually hit different, and deep down he was secretly loving every second of being looked after. The day finally arrived for him to pack up and head out. Right by the fountain, the carriages were hitched up and ready to roll. Crow was hanging back, taking his spot at the very end of the line. He's sorting through the gear with Seabase, and realizes the mountain of luggage is totally overkill, silently noting that they've definitely brought way too much stuff. Most of them were just empty bottles, but they were the absolute key to his master plan. Owl closed the gap and shouted over to Crow, making sure the gear was finally packed and ready to move. Right behind him stood two familiar faces who had shown up just to give them a proper send-off. Crow whips around only to find his big brother Hawk and their father standing right there, so he plays it cool and gives them a formal greeting. Hawk was visibly moved to see them there, flashing a bittersweet smile as he apologized for not being able to tag along. But before Crow could head out, he reached deep into his coat to pull out one last parting gift. Hawk snatched up a blinding, fist-sized crimson gem that was practically glowing with power. It was a legendary, ultra-rare magic stone worth an absolute fortune. Crow's jaw hit the floor, knowing he was holding a literal king's ransom in his hand. But Hawk just shrugged it off like it was pocket change, telling him to save it for when things really hit the fan. Crow clutched it like a sacred relic, his heart overflowing with gratitude, before spinning around to face his father and... He drops into a deep bow, thanking the crew for coming out to see him off one last time. His father stayed dead silent, giving him a sharp nod that practically shouted for him to get the job done. Seabase steps in to signal it's finally go time, and Crow and Owl nod in perfect sync as they gear up to board. Right before hopping in, Crow paused and turned back to Seabass, giving him one last heartfelt thank you before saying his final goodbye. Crow's jaw hits the floor when Seabass reveals he's not staying behind. He's actually tagging along to Nest Village, and Crow is absolutely blindsided by the news. Seabass holds the keys to the kingdom as the Eldorado family's head butler, so when Crow asks if he's really allowed to just walk away, Seabass drops the news that Lord Fesson himself already signed off on it. Looking back with a wave of nostalgia, Seabass realized Crow had undergone a massive transformation in just 30 days, because even though the nobles laughed at his weak skills, the kid had already mapped out his future with absolute ironclad conviction. Touched to his core, Seabass dropped into a deep bow and swore to dedicate every single second of his life to serving him. It was Crow and only Crow, leaving him absolutely floored by the sheer intensity of Seabass's ride-or-die loyalty. He whispered his name, reached out and firmly locked hands with Seabass. Right then and there, fueled by the trust of everyone behind him, he swore to lead this territory to absolute greatness. Standing right behind them, their family watched on, backing them up with every ounce of their silent support. Crow takes one final look back before declaring it's officially time to move out. Hawk lets out a massive cheer, knowing his little brother is destined for greatness. Their father hands over the reins to Seabass, officially trusting him with Crow's life. Seabass gives a respectful bow, vowing that everything is under control. As the carriage starts rolling, Crow prepares himself for the grueling week-long trek ahead. Their destination is Nest Village, a remote outpost sitting right on the edge of monster-infested woods. But for Crow, this isn't just a trip. It's the start of his true legend. He stared down the path ahead with a confident smirk, already tasting the legendary future he was about to forge. Soon enough, Crow Eldorado wouldn't be famous for his blade, but for being the absolute genius who built an empire from scratch. History would eventually crown him with a title that would echo through the ages: the father of local governance. Flashback to when this whole crazy journey first kicked off. Crow stood frozen before the high priest, his mind spiraling as his true skills were finally laid bare. Watching from the side, his father hit a breaking point, burying his face in his hands in total despair. He'd been banking on the hope that being a dual wielder meant he'd be some kind of legendary god-tier powerhouse, but he was completely frozen, unable to utter a single word. As the tension reached a breaking point, Seabass cried out in a panic, warning Lord Pheasant to stay on his toes. Crow stood there frozen as the crushing truth hit him. His new powers were a total disaster, and now everyone looked at him like he was the ultimate failure. The carriage thundered down the road, closing the distance as they drew closer to their destination. Crow's just chilling by the window, watching the world blur past as they finally close in on Nest Village after days of trekking from the royal capital. The trip was mostly smooth sailing, aside from that one chaotic detour where they had to scrap with a pack of bandits raiding a merchant caravan. That was the exact moment everything changed for Crow. Ever since he got back from the capital, he'd been grinding like crazy to master his alchemy. So when those bandits finally made their move, he jumped at the chance to see if his skills actually worked in a real fight. And against all odds, he completely wrecked the attackers and saved the entire merchant caravan. It turns out his skills were way more useful than anyone ever imagined. Just as the trip was winding down, a voice from outside the carriage shouted his name. They'd finally reached Nest Village, and it was time to ditch the ride and move on foot. That was Yored, a B-rank adventurer leading the swift archer party tasked with keeping them safe. He wasn't alone either, bringing along his teammates, the archer nurses and the mage Sifa. The trio had been recruited as temporary muscle to beef up the village's defenses. Crow hopped down, his mind racing as he wondered what kind of secrets Nest Village was hiding. But the second his village peeks over the horizon, that spark of hope in his chest instantly turns to ice, because the entire place is a total, absolute wasteland. Fences are smashed and leaning at jagged angles. The sturdy homes he once knew are now nothing but rotting heaps of rubble, and wild vines have completely choked the life out of everything in sight. Owl, Seabass, and Crow stopped dead in their tracks, paralyzed by a sight that left even these battle-hardened veterans completely speechless. The cold, hard truth of these forgotten lands finally slapped them in the face, and as the shock began to fade, someone floats the idea of finally moving into the village. Seabass takes one look and realizes the place is a total disaster zone, way worse than he ever expected. But the second they step forward, everyone's head snapped toward a mysterious figure looming on a rooftop. A lone archer draws back their string, locking eyes on the dark forest ahead. We see exactly why a second later as a pack of wolves explodes out of the shadows. These are Wild Fangs, vicious D-rank monsters that are nothing but trouble. The village was already a total war zone, and Seabass took one look at the carnage and realized they were running out of time, so without wasting a single heartbeat, Crow barked out his orders, leading the archers in a volley of arrows to lure those Wild Fangs far away from the village. Meanwhile, Seabass and Owl looped around the sides, striking from the flanks to keep the villagers safe. Seabass tried to object, terrified for Crow's life, but Owl shut him down by pointing out how much of a beast Crow has been in his recent fights. Right as the bandits struck, he felt a surge of pride in his brother's growth, reassured Seabass that they were ready, and geared up for Crow's wild plan to bait the monsters with a massive wall of noise. One of the lightning-fast archers jumps into the action, desperate to help out by unleashing a hidden spell. A massive roaring ball of flame suddenly explodes right from the tip of his staff. He craters right into the dirt, sending a massive wave of debris exploding into the air. The blast left the wolves reeling in total chaos, and seeing his opening, Crow wasted no time and blitzed straight into the fray. Suddenly, one of the wolves snaps and launches itself straight at Yord. But Crow moved like lightning, slamming his palms into the dirt to ignite his alchemy, and erupting a massive clay wall that shielded Yord from the wolf's strike at the very last second. Yord stammered out a thank you, still visibly shaken but relieved to be alive. Meanwhile, Crow was already dissecting the raw mechanics of the spell in his mind. He'd basically fused raw earth with pure magical energy to summon that wall, showing off just how versatile his alchemy really is. Because when you boil it down, alchemy is all about. This was the legendary art of equivalent exchange, the power to literally rewrite matter. Just imagine, with the right ratio, you could transmute 15 kilos of silver into a single kilo of pure gold. And as Crow crunched the numbers in his head, his appraisal skill finally gave him the full breakdown. Basically, alchemy lets him fuse different materials together with a burst of mana to completely rewrite their properties. Sure, it's not a flashy combat move, but in the right hands, this power has absolutely zero limits. Crow was finally decoding the deepest secrets of how alchemy actually functions. It hit him. Magical energy isn't just fuel. It's a physical material you can trade in equivalent exchange. By slamming mana into solid matter, he could reshape any substance on a whim. Mix earth with magic and you get transmutation. But if he plays his cards right, he can even rewrite enemy spells mid-air. That's when it hit him. He'd finally tapped into the true soul of alchemy, a power way deeper than anyone could have imagined. But he kept that secret to himself, knowing the idiots around him still didn't have a clue what this power was actually worth. Back in the heart of the carnage, those wild fangs are absolutely relentless, refusing to give an inch. Every single member of Seabass is locked in a high-stakes dance, slashing and weaving through the wolf pack to survive. One of the archers shouted in a panic, realizing they were getting buried under sheer numbers, and this grind was going to take forever. Crow scanned the chaos and made a split-second call. He barked an order at All and Seaboss, telling them to fall back and regroup immediately. As they pull back, Crow drops to one knee, slams his palm into the earth, and unleashes his refining spell. Earth Needle! And in the blink of an eye, a lethal forest of jagged spikes explodes right out of the ground. He skewered those savage beasts with lethal pinpoint accuracy. The entire pack was wiped out in one devastating blur of motion. The survivors were left absolutely paralyzed by how fast it all ended. Owl and his elite archers could only gape in total shock at the impossible sight. Even the stoic Seabass couldn't hide his shock, admitting that wiping out that many wild fangs in a single hit was a terrifying display of raw power. Even Crow was left totally speechless, stunned that a basic beginner-level earth spell could unleash that much absolute carnage. Seabass sized up the massive spikes and dropped a bombshell. This spell was as powerful as Ground Needle, an intermediate-tier technique that left Crow completely floored. Could one guy really pull off something that insane? Right then, a man stepped up from behind and started showering the group with thanks. He introduced himself as Wagner, the head honcho of Nest Village. Seabass steps up with total class, introducing himself as the El Dorado butler before revealing that Crow is actually the family's third son and the brand new lord of Nest Village. Wagner's ego completely vanishes as he stares at Crow with pure, unadulterated respect. He's genuinely stunned that Crow would trek all the way to the literal edge of the world just to find them. But Crow doesn't flinch, standing tall as he lays out exactly why he's here. See, Nest Village isn't just some random outpost. It's a vital piece of the El Dorado Empire. He's on a mission to transform this entire region into a powerhouse of prosperity. Crow offers his hand, and Wagner grips it with a level of respect he's never shown anyone before. With the boring formalities finally out of the way, Wagner led Crow, Seabass, and Owl on a grand tour through the heart of the village. Navigating the shattered, vine-choked roads, Crow stayed dead silent, his eyes scanning every shadow for any sign of a threat. The state of these ruins was a total nightmare. Way worse than anything Crow had imagined. Villagers slumped against rotting walls and broken fences, looking completely drained and on high alert. The whole place felt heavy with a thick, suffocating sense of despair. Crow realized instantly that if he didn't fix these houses and secure the perimeter, this village was doomed. He asks Wagner if these wild fang attacks are a regular occurrence. but Wagner tells him those beasts almost never venture out of the cursed forest. But lately they've been popping up way more often, and it's clear the forest's natural balance has been completely thrown out of whack. He broke it down for him. A massive swarm of creatures called Labirds had suddenly started popping up everywhere. These monsters might be flightless, but don't let that fool you. They're incredibly aggressive, and there's a whole army of them. They've basically set up camp right on the edge of the forest, claiming the whole perimeter as their own. Because they're crowding the place, they're actually shoving other monsters like wild fangs right into the village's backyard. Crow just listened silently, letting the weight of the situation sink in. A Labird might only be a low E rank, but in these numbers, they're more than enough to throw the entire ecosystem into total chaos. Crow knew for a fact that something massive was brewing, so he got dead serious and dropped the game plan. Owl and the swift archers are hitting the cursed forest for scouting tomorrow, while Seabass stays back with the local hunters to make sure Nest Village doesn't fall. Seabass notices Crows is absolutely gassed after burning through all that mana, so he steps in and tells him he needs to take a breather right now. But Crow just brushes it off with a calm smirk, letting everyone know he's far from finished. Under a sky bleeding with the last light of sunset, Crow dropped to one knee and slammed his palm into the dirt, letting raw magic roar through his hand. The ground erupts as a massive reinforced wall of soil surges upward to shield them, perfectly executing his refining earth wall spell. Seabass stood there with his jaw on the floor, finally realizing the sheer scale of what Crow had just pulled off. Crow then breaks it down, explaining that they're going to ring the entire village with these massive fortifications. Once the perimeter is finished, no monster in their right mind is going to be able to break through. Jord, one of the swift archers, stood there with his jaw on the floor. He could barely stutter out a sentence, wondering how on earth Crow was still pulling off high-tier magic after that massive ground needle spell he just dropped. His teammate Sifa was just as paralyzed with disbelief. Any normal mage would have been completely drained and running on fumes by this point. That actually made Crow stop dead in his tracks, because now that they brought it up, that's when he realized something was seriously off. Despite spamming magic every single day, he'd never actually hit his limit, and he started to wonder if he was just built different. Seabass watched their insane pace and realized they'd be done way before sunset, so one of the archers figured they might as well start cooking up a feast while they waited. Seabass cracked a knowing smirk, once again blown away by how Crow always manages to keep him guessing. As the last rays of sun dip below the horizon, Crow's mental log updates with the latest intel. Nest Village now has 50 residents, a dead-eye owl archer named Sebastian, and a massive earthen wall that's finally making this place feel secure. It wasn't long before things kicked right back into gear. The golden sunset washed over the village, making those brand new roofs and walls shimmer with a warm, triumphant glow. A row of freshly finished houses stood tall, looking like a picture-perfect neighborhood straight out of a catalog. Seabass and Wagner stood there frozen, their jaws hitting the floor as they stared at the insane transformation. Seabass tried to find his voice, but his throat went dry and the words just wouldn't come. He whipped his head toward Crow, his eyes wide with pure, unadulterated disbelief. Crow didn't even blink, coolly pointing out the obvious. It was just a simple villager's house. Still reeling from the shock, Seabass demanded to know how such a masterpiece could have been built in the blink of an eye. Crow started breaking down exactly how he pulled this off. First, he used alchemy to crush and level the earth, forging a rock-solid foundation that wasn't going anywhere. Then, he raised the walls using the same high-grade earth as the outer defenses, making the whole structure incredibly tough and uniform. Finally, Crow led Seabass and Wagner inside to give them the full grand tour. He shows off the kitchen right by the entrance, complete with built-in air vents, before leading them into a massive central hall perfect for feasting and kicking back. Lastly, he shows off the bedroom, pointing out how he tweaked the wall thickness to make the room dead silent. He proudly explains that he pulled this off by using the exact same tech from the village's massive defensive walls. Wagner can barely even breathe, his brain completely fried by the sheer scale of Crow's insane craftsmanship. The moment the trio steps back outside, they find the villagers frozen in place, staring in shock at something massive on the horizon. A crowd is already gathering, whispering in total disbelief at the colossal structure now looming over the entire village. One woman can barely find the words to ask what it even is, while the guy next to her can only guess that it's some kind of massive building. Standing right in front of them was a massive, ultra-modern high-rise that looked absolutely pristine. Crow's watching from the sidelines, feeling totally awkward, since he never meant to flex this hard. but his little project somehow turned into a full-blown luxury condo. He catches Wagner losing his mind over how earth magic could even be this broken, while Seabass just whispers that the kid is a literal god-tier mage before quickly changing the subject. Crow led the pack straight toward the central square. But as he stepped into the heart of Nest Village, he was greeted by the sudden happy sounds of kids playing. Looking at the empty space, a surge of pure determination hit him. He could already see it. A bustling square where the townspeople could finally relax and children's laughter would fill the air. Without wasting a second, Crow dropped to his knees and slammed his magic deep into the soil. With surgical precision, he molds the raw earth and timber into a squad of instructors right before our eyes. The ground trembles as wooden beams snap into place, and just like that, rows of benches start materializing out of nowhere. Before they knew it, a massive playground was standing tall, fully loaded with slides, benches, and epic climbing areas. The kids stood there paralyzed, their eyes popping out of their heads in pure shock. Instantly, a few of them scrambled away to start exploring every inch of the playground. This one kid is absolutely gunning to be the first one down the slide, while a girl's right on his heels shouting that she wanted to go first. Crow slides right into the chaos, acting like the ultimate referee to make sure everyone actually takes turns. He cracks up seeing Wagner trying to act slick while sneaking into the slide line with the same hyped-up energy as the kids, and even Seabass is left totally floored by the tech, giving Crow some massive props for such a genius invention. Crow gets all flustered, turning bright red as he tries to play off the praise. Real talk. The idea wasn't even his, just something he'd ripped off from his memory. But seeing the pure hype and joy on everyone's faces, that was more than enough for him. Finally, Seabass speaks up, noting that Owl and the rest of the crew should be back any minute now. Crow agreed, thinking that with the plaza finally finished, it was time to whip up a legendary feast for tonight. As night falls, the mouth-watering scent of a feast drifts through the air while smoke curls from the brand-new houses, and the whole village huddles around a massive bonfire, their laughter echoing into the dark. He makes it back just as the party's heating up, shouting a greeting to Crow, who welcomes him home with a massive grin. Right before their eyes is a massive haul of freshly hunted Labirds, stacked up into a literal mountain of meat. Crow takes one look at the pile and confirms the jackpot. Yep, that's all prime Labird meat right there. He gave a sharp nod, promising that with a haul this massive, the entire village was finally gonna eat like kings. I spot a fresh BBQ station nearby and ask if Crow built that too. He confirms it, showing off how the grill actually transforms into a table the moment you shut the lid. The vibe was totally killed when a voice rang out, and Seabass stepped into the spotlight to confront both Crow and Owl. He handed Crow a skewer of Labird yakitori, and Crow snatched it up without a second thought. He tore into the grilled meat as the flavor exploded, and everyone was losing it over how perfectly that seasoning hit. Crow acted casual, asking Owl what kind of crazy ingredients he'd managed to scavenge on his trip. In response, Owl just handed over a mysterious-looking pouch. Burning with curiosity, Crow immediately fired up his appraisal skill to see what he was dealing with. He identifies the loot in a heartbeat. We've got some solid mid-grade healing herbs here. Mix these with some clean water, and boom, you've got a fresh recovery potion ready to go. Then he spots some low-grade detoxy herbs. They're just the thing you need to whip up some basic detox potions. He even scores some mid-grade mana compost. This stuff is bursting with mana and nutrients, making it the ultimate fertilizer for magical crops. Staring up at the shimmering night sky, Crow felt a massive surge of pride. With these resources finally secured, their massive farming project was officially a go. You could finally see it. All that hard work was paying off as the territory's growth exploded. Golden firelight danced across the village as the air buzzed with the sound of kids playing and pure, joyful laughter. Watching the whole scene play out, Crow couldn't help but smirk. They still had a mountain to climb, but they were finally making some serious moves. He couldn't wait to see what was next as he checked his stats, finding a thriving village of 50 people complete with new houses, playgrounds, and even BBQ pits. And the best part? Everyone was finally starting to act like a real family. Meanwhile, we're cutting way over to the east, right into the heart of the Viscount's sprawling territory. But over in the El Dorado region, a completely different kind of madness was kicking off. A maid rushes into the grand hall, announcing she's got urgent news. The elegant noblewoman stands up with perfect poise, demanding to hear the report. The servant doesn't waste a second and delivers the message. A letter has just arrived from none other than the legendary El Dorado family. The news dropped that Lord Crow had officially set off for the borderlands, and the second Rose heard it, her eyes practically caught fire as she started badgering the servant for every single detail. Right in the heart of the Nest Village Plaza, Crow stood frozen as he watched the entire harvest shrivel and rot into nothing. He saw the wreckage and knew instantly. The wild farm had completely wiped out the harvest. Wagner's face fell as the weight of the situation finally hit him. Without those crops, the entire village was looking at a winter of total starvation. Crow thought back to the wheat from the Sebastel Dorado family, but he knew even that wouldn't be enough to save them. Even Seabass had to admit, things were looking incredibly grim. Crow stared out at the smoking ruins and realized he didn't have a single second to waste. He turns to Wagner, hunting for a backup plan besides wheat, and Wagner reveals that Nest Village survives on pearl millet, a powerhouse crop that thrives even in the most brutal, bone-dry dirt. A wild plan starts clicking into place, so Crow leans in and whispers a secret favor to Seabass, leaving Wagner looking absolutely clueless. As soon as they break the huddle, Crow's eyes ignite with a brand new sense of purpose. Then, he drops a total bombshell. They're officially done growing pearl millet. Instead, he flipped the script and suggested they start mass-producing life-saving healing herbs. The villagers stood there completely paralyzed, their faces twisted with pure shock. You could practically feel the wave of doubt rippling through the entire crowd. One woman just kept muttering healing grass under her breath, like she couldn't believe her own ears. Another guy starts panicking, shouting that if this fails, the whole village is toast. But Crow quickly shuts him down, promising they're still planting plenty of wheat as a backup. Crow turns to Seabass to talk business, finding out that while corn fetches a cool 100 gil from the caravans, a single bundle of healing grass is the real prize at 300. The light bulb finally went off in Wagner's head. From now on, they were pivoting to grow nothing but high-value cash crops. Crow backed him up, dropping the bombshell that he already had a buyer waiting in the wings. With his alchemy skills, he could whip those herbs into elite potions worth tens of thousands of gil each. Even with a skeptic in the crowd doubting his every word, Crow didn't budge an inch on his claim. Wagner was baffled, demanding to know if legendary healing herbs could actually sprout in a regular old field. Crow just looked him in the eye and told him it was absolutely possible. His secret? He was going to pump the very earth full of raw, concentrated magic. He figured out that the rarest herbs always sprout in monster territory, basically feeding off the magical energy left behind in their waste. Crow put the dirt to the test and confirmed it was absolutely buzzing with concentrated mana. Staring down at the dying wheat, a wild idea hits Crow. What if he could pump magic into regular plants? He slams his hand onto the parched field, and pure mana starts surging right from his fingertips. The villagers watched in absolute shock as the entire field underwent a mind-blowing, miraculous transformation right before their eyes. The wheat was absolutely exploding with life, and while the soil was still pretty weak, the raw magic was doing all the heavy lifting to keep the crops thriving. Crow flashed a confident grin at the villagers, promising them that at this rate, he'd have every single field back to life in no time. That total wasteland had been completely transformed, exploding back to life with vibrant greenery. One farmer was absolutely losing it, calling the whole thing a straight-up miracle, while a woman realized they could finally grow life-saving herbs, and just like that, the entire village was fired up and ready to grind together. Crow grinned as he realized his herb field had officially exploded to twice its original size, meaning he could finally start mass-producing potions like a machine. If they pull this off, it's gonna be the village's legendary signature specialty. A few hours pass, and suddenly, a basket overflowing with eggs is plopped down right in front of Crow. Crow whirled around to Al, eyes popping at the mountain of eggs, while Al just crossed his arms with a smug grin, ready to brag about his big discovery. He smugly reveals that snacking on healing grass turns Labirds into total couch potatoes. But Crow just stares back, completely baffled by the news. Iol reveals that while deep in the Devil's Forest, he stumbled onto a flock of Labirds feasting on healing grass, and the result was something he never saw coming. Out of nowhere, they actually started laying eggs. He realized with a grin that Labirds only drop their goods when they're feeling 100% relaxed. It wasn't a sure thing yet, but man, this was a massive breakthrough. Yordlin leaned in and whispered the unbelievable truth to Crow. Those herbs knocked the Labirds out so cold that snatching their eggs was basically like taking candy from a sleeping baby. Crow's curiosity was officially piqued, so he switched gears to ask the real question. What does a Labird X actually taste like? I'm still vibing over that time in the royal capital when he finally got his hands on a legendary Oyako sandwich. Packed with fresh eggs and Labird meat, that thing was a straight-up flavor explosion. The way he painted that picture had Crow and the Swift Archer squad practically drowning in their own drool. Moments later, the village square was engulfed in steam as everyone fired up the kitchens to get a massive feast going. He stacks up golden, crispy toast around a runny egg yolk and juicy grilled Labird meat to create the legendary Ladybird Oyako sandwich. Crow gives the dish a quick once-over before immediately sinking his teeth in. That flavor hit him like a freight train, sending his senses into total overdrive. It's straight-up mouth-watering perfection. That golden crunch of the bread slams into the silky, runny egg and dripping meat for a total flavor explosion. Crow was absolutely devouring everything in sight, and he just couldn't stop. While he's absolutely inhaling that sandwich, a wild realization suddenly hits him. He realized that having a mountain of these legendary eggs whenever he wanted would be an absolute game-changer. Right then, a genius idea hit him like a bolt of lightning. Buzzing with excitement, he immediately summoned Sea Bass and Al Nisama, telling them they needed to have a major sit-down ASAP. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the entire village had already swarmed around the chicken coop. Just then, an egg plummets from one of the Larabirds and lands right in the straw. The bird let out a lazy, arrogant chirp, acting like it's the king of the world. The villagers stood there in absolute awe of the egg, but some were totally creeped out by the bird's soulless eyes and its weirdly calm vibe. I've got to hand it to Crow. That victory was absolutely legendary. The crew was absolutely hyped to have eggs back on the menu every single day, and a satisfied Crow couldn't help but smirk. The timing was perfect, since he was just about to whip up a batch of healing herbs anyway. His mind flashed back to that morning when he and Al braved the demon's forest just to snag a female Laribird. He felt a sting of guilt, knowing Seabass was absolutely fuming after he'd explicitly warned him not to handle this mission alone. Crow looked back on how he'd used his insane alchemy skills to forge this entire breeding facility from scratch. He spent time layering the ground with soft straw, making sure the place was a total paradise for his Laribirds. Now that the hard part was done, Crow started racking his brain to figure out who could actually manage these birds for him. Suddenly, this absolute unit of a guy steps out of the crowd to handle the birds, and when Crow asks who he's dealing with, he just drops his name, Kentucky. Crow hesitated for a second before finally giving in, but he dropped a dead serious warning. Those Laribirds are strictly off-limits, no matter what happens. Crow clutched the birds tight, feeling their dead, glassy eyes practically screaming at him to hand them over. Just as Kentucky caught a glimpse and pointed out that, sure, their eyes were creepy as hell, but you can't deny they were actually kind of adorable. So Crow just gave a non-committal shrug and decided they'd all take turns babysitting them. The village report is finally looking solid. Nest Village is home to 50 residents and a flock of dead-eyed Laribirds, with a brand new herbal garden and breeding grounds officially open for business. And the best part? They've finally secured a rock-solid supply of eggs. Meanwhile, on a rough and bumpy trail, a caravan is clattering along as it pushes forward. Inside sat a high-class noblewoman, her eyes sharp and glowing with a fierce intensity. The mustachioed guy next to her kept thanking her for being his bodyguard, though he kept asking if she was actually cool with the job. Rose just flashed him a beaming smile and told him she was more than okay with it. After all, she was only there to level up her skills, and staying cooped up at home would have been a total bore. But the peaceful ride is instantly shattered when the carriage slams to a bone-rattling halt. The carriage slammed to a violent halt, sending the passengers flying as they struggled to keep their balance. Outside, the coachman was shaking with pure terror, his voice cracking as he struggled to get a single word out. Sensing something was dead wrong, the man with the mustache bolted upright and peered out the window to see what was blocking their path. Shaking with pure terror, the coachman frantically screams that a monster has appeared. A pack of snarling wolves is closing in fast, and they're hungry for the caravan. Mustache Guy's face instantly twists in a look of pure terror. He shouts that they aren't even close to the cursed forest yet, but monsters are already launching an all-out assault. He's so blinded by fear that he doesn't even realize Rose has completely vanished from his side. He keeps rambling, trying to ask Lady Rose what to do, only to freeze mid-sentence when he realizes she's long gone from the carriage. Mustache Man looks out the window, and his eyes practically pop out of his skull in total shock. Rose has already vaulted from the carriage, blade drawn, shredding through those wolves before she even sticks the landing. A wild grin spreads across her face as she lets out a shout of pure, adrenaline-fueled joy. This is exactly the kind of chaos she's been hunting for. This right here, this is the true heart-pounding thrill of the frontier. Deep in the heart of the woods, Crow trekked along, wondering just how many wild fangs had blundered into his traps today. He knew their parts would fetch a massive price on the market, so the entire cursed forest was rigged with snares to wipe out the beasts and stack some serious cash. He knew the timing was perfect for a massive haul, and was already dreaming of a fat paycheck. But he came to a dead stop when his foot landed right on top of a rotting carcass. Feeling something crunch under his boot, he immediately barked at the swift archer squad to see if they'd rigged the area with traps. But something was seriously off. Dozens of wild fawn corpses were strewn across the dirt, leaving the Swift Archer members just as baffled about what could have wiped them all out. That's when Crow's eyes snapped forward, locking onto a lone figure emerging from the shadows ahead. With a flash of her shimmering blade, this noble lady executes the final beast with a move that's pure, high-class perfection. She stared down those massive fangs and straight up told the beast they were nothing but a joke. Crow's jaw hit the floor as he stared in total shock. Standing right there was Rose, the last person he ever expected to run into. She spun around and hit him with that same old cocky smirk. It had been a lifetime since these two were last in the same room. Rose let out a low, menacing rumble. She's the eldest daughter of the noble Viscount family and his childhood friend, a total combat prodigy who, just like his big sister, spent years sharpening her blade with one singular obsession, becoming an elite knight, surveying the absolute carnage of wild fawn corpses. Crow realized Rose was the one behind the slaughter, and groaned at what a total battle junkie she was, but she just shrugged it off like it was nothing. Crow lets out a heavy sigh, but he can't help but crack a confident smirk. The crew at Nest Village rolled out the red carpet and gave her the warmest welcome ever. Back in the village just a few minutes later, Crow runs into a familiar face who greets him with a massive grin, and he matches that hype instantly. Enter Stewart, a bearded merchant for the Eldredo family and the powerhouse leader of the caravan running the long trek from Bird's Garden straight to the royal capital. Crow realized in a flash. This was the exact same caravan he'd saved from those ruthless bandits on his way to Nest Village. Ever since that day, he'd had Stewart drop by on the regular just to keep their friendship going strong. Crow was seriously grateful, thanking Stewart for making the trek and giving Rose a lift to the village. Stewart just shrugged it off, insisting it was absolutely no big deal. In fact, he admitted that without Crow's help, they might not have survived the trip. But just a few moments later, the village's massive new aqueduct finally comes into focus, and the locals are already busy hauling fresh water from the wells. Stewart scans the horizon of Nest Village, his mind spinning as he tries to process this massive glow-up. The transformation is nothing short of legendary. All the intel said this was a freezing, dirt-poor wasteland with barely 50 souls to its name. But looking at it now, those reports couldn't be further from the truth. And Crow, he's right there with him, realizing the rumors were dead wrong. A full month has passed since he rolled into Nest Village, and the transformation is unreal. The farms have exploded in size, and the villagers are grinding with a brand new fire in their souls. Crow basically spent the entire month grinding away at massive construction projects. Thanks to all that sweat, they finally tapped right into the Yugurt River flowing down from the Kagis Mountains. They'd officially secured a steady flow of fresh water for both drinking and everyday use. Digging out a 10-kilometer waterway and reinforcing the earth was a brutal job that really took a toll on Crow. It was pure, back-breaking labor that left him completely wiped out. Once that was done, he told Stewart he was finally going to show him the secret stash they were planning to flip. Stewart's jaw hit the floor as he looked around, wondering if they'd just stepped into some massive underground bunker. Crow breaks it down, explaining that keeping the temperature and humidity steady is the only way to stop these potions from spoiling. But it wasn't just drinks. The place was packed to the brim with rare monster parts and high-end gear. They hit the main storage room where Stewart eyes the massive haul of potions, monster drops, and gear. And Crow just gives the nod, grabbing a crate to start the inventory. Stashed inside were 3 legendary A-rank recovery potions and a massive pile of 120 B-ranks. Stewart's jaw hit the floor the second he saw them. Finding 3 A-ranks in one spot was like hitting the ultimate jackpot. He could barely believe his own eyes, leaving him completely stunned and speechless. In this world, healing potions are split into 3 distinct tiers, starting with the dirt-cheap C rank that's great for stopping a bleed but barely gives you any real energy back. B rank potions are on a completely different level of power. These things don't just stop the bleeding. They literally stitch your wounds back together and pump life back into your veins. But since they cost a literal fortune, you'll only see them in the hands of wealthy nobles or the absolute top-tier adventurers. But A-rank potions, those are on a completely different level of rare. You won't find these sitting on any shop shelf. They're strictly hoarded by the royal family and the highest-tier nobles. Their power is straight-up legendary, capable of regrowing severed limbs and wiping out even the most incurable diseases. It was absolutely insane that a backwater town like Nest Village was pumping out such high-tier gear, and Crow couldn't help but smirk at Stewart's total disbelief. Stewart begged to inspect the potions himself, and Crow gave him the green light without a second thought. They kicked things off with the B-rank potion, carefully squeezing a single drop into a specialized testing glass. The liquid flashes a vibrant orange, instantly confirming it's a solid B grade. Next up, they move on to the big guns, the A-rank potion. But this time the glass doesn't just change color. It explodes into a mesmerizing, shimmering rainbow. Stuart was absolutely buzzing because the tests just confirmed these potions were 100% legit. Little did he know, Crow had already scoped them out with his appraisal skill way before the meeting even started. With the hard part over, Crow asked if Seaboss could take the reins on the rest of the deal, and Stuart didn't hesitate to say yes. With the business deal finally wrapped up, Crow hits the village playground, scanning the area and muttering under his breath. Where on earth did Rose disappear to? His gaze instantly locked onto her. She was right in the thick of it, laughing her heart out and flying down the slides with the kids. It was clear she'd already won them over, and they were vibing like total besties. Crow took in the heartwarming scene, feeling a wave of pure relief wash over him as he watched everyone finally having the time of their lives. Rose spun around to face Crow, holding a little girl tight in her arms. Her face lit up with pure joy as she started gushing about the playground, calling the person who built it a total mastermind. The girl beams with pride, dropping the bombshell that Crow built everything here, from the massive walls to every single house. Rose stands there frozen, her brain completely short-circuiting as she tries to process that insane revelation. She stammers out a no way, but Crow just gives a modest nod, acting like building a whole town was just another Tuesday. Rose completely lost her cool, grabbing his shoulders and yelling that there's no way this insane craftsmanship came from anything other than high-tier alchemy. Honestly, a fortress this stacked was light years beyond anything you'd ever find in some backwater village. Crow just shrugged it off like it was nothing, casually offering to show her around the rest of the place. Stepping inside Crow's actual apartment, Rose was absolutely floored by the unique design, her eyes practically glued to it. She turned to him and asked if he was really the genius who built the whole thing. Crow just gave her a shy, bashful grin, clearly feeling a little modest. But then, the vibe shifted instantly as her voice turned dead serious. She finally opened up, admitting she was worried sick the moment she heard about Crow's insane skill and realized he'd actually ditched home for good. That news hit her like a freight train, and you could tell she was spiraling. Crow went dead silent for a heartbeat. Then he looked up with a sharp grin. He told her to relax because he wasn't sweating it one bit. After all, he's still got his big brothers watching his back over at the El Dorado mansion. And he was dead set on pushing his limits, determined to handle everything with nothing but his own raw grit. Rose was completely caught off guard when she saw that unshakable fire and resolve burning in his eyes. She turned beet red as it finally clicked. She's a completely different person now compared to the last time they stood face to face. Crow couldn't wait to see what she'd scored, and Rose, practically beaming with pride, revealed her skill was a wind-based physical buff just like Alchemists, the exact reason she'd come here to master her elemental magic. Crow realized this skill was a match made in heaven for her battle-crazed soul, and he was just stoked to see her looking so fired up again. He tells her to go soak her travel-weary bones, and Rose's eyes light up like a kid on Christmas at the mention of a bath. She starts praising the village for being so high class, leaving a flustered Crow to awkwardly admit that his house is actually the only one with a tub. By sunset, the village plaza transformed into a massive double celebration for Rose and the caravan, with everyone firing up the grills for an epic barbecue that kept the party vibes going all night long. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Seabass tracked down Crow to confirm that the deal with the young master's steward was officially in the bag, handing over the financial breakdown for Crow to scan with a sharp, calculated eye. His eyes practically popped out of his head at the sight of all that cash, but Seabass was quick to explain that this figure was the pure profit they'd cleared after accounting for the salt. Crow was absolutely stunned. He couldn't believe that selling just one A-rank potion had actually netted them such a massive payday. To everyone's shock, the monster loot and crafted gear sold for a literal mountain of gold, blowing their original estimates out of the water. But the real MVPs were the rare bird feather duvets and pillows, which fetched a massive premium and became the absolute top sellers of the bunch. Crow's voice just sort of drifted away as the sheer weight of their profit hit him. He takes one look at the goods and realizes the quality is absolutely insane. There's no doubt about it. Every high-ranking noble is going to be dying to get their hands on these. Crow then turns to Seabass, checking in to see if their food haul is all accounted for. Seabass inspects the crates and confirms they've secured a massive... They hauled in fresh tomatoes from Red Village and snagged all that rich cheese and butter from Ragnar Village. Crow's jaw hits the floor as he stares into the crates, absolutely blown away by the sheer mountain of top-tier ingredients. Seabass breaks down the plan, explaining how the tomatoes are destined for the sauce pot while the dairy gets hauled into the underground cellar to stay ice cold and fresh. Clutching a tomato in his hand, Crow realizes that with a haul this good, they finally have everything they need to pull off that legendary dish. Fast forward a few hours, and the heavenly scent of fresh baking floods the streets, leaving every single villager absolutely drooling. A massive brick oven roared with fire right in the heart of the plaza. Right on cue, Crow reaches into the oven to snatch up exactly what he's been cooking. Out comes a piping hot, bubbling masterpiece loaded with toppings. Crow's legendary special pizza. He dives in for a massive bite, savoring every single explosion of flavor. No joke, this thing tastes like a literal slice of heaven. I mean, who would have guessed you could find a gourmet pizza joint in a crazy world like this? Crow looked back in that freshly built pizza oven, realizing his month of hardcore engineering training was finally paying off in ways he never imagined. The kid points straight at the oven, asking what it is. He's probably thinking he just found a brand new toy to mess around with. Crow broke it down, explaining that this massive beast was a pizza oven meant for cooking up a storm. He immediately warned the kids to keep their hands off, though, because this thing was lethal and definitely not a toy. But of course, one kid just had to ask the million-dollar question. Is this pizza stuff actually as delicious as it sounds? Laughing Crow confirmed it was the real deal and told them to bring their friends along, causing the girl to nod like a maniac as she promised to round up the entire gang. Suddenly, Stuart bursts onto the scene, practically drooling over the smell and begging for a slice, while Wagner and a mob of villagers charge right behind him, all desperate for a taste. Crow's jaw hit the floor as a massive crowd swarmed him, but he quickly snapped into action and started whipping them into an orderly line. That same girl from before suddenly popped back up with a friend in tow, and Crow's eyes nearly popped out of his head when he realized it was actually Rose. Hyped up by the insane aroma and the electric energy, Rose announced she'd heard the legend of this pizza and was dying to get a taste for herself. Crow stood there in total shock, his heart racing with a mix of pure joy and, is this actually happening? He couldn't help but wonder how his life had turned into such a wild, high-energy circus. Seriously, wasn't he supposed to be some kind of high and mighty noble? Suddenly, the status screen flickered to life, showing the brand new stats for Nest Village. We're looking at a population of over 50, an underground warehouse, a pizza kiln, and a stash of E and B rank potions ready to go. While the village slept peacefully, a haunting scream suddenly shattered the forest's silence. Kayao! Kayao! A pale, lifeless monster lay sprawled on the cold ground, and huddled right against it was the source of those whimpers, a tiny, fluffy white cub sobbing in the pitch-black darkness. The morning air was deathly silent as Crow found himself standing right back in the heart of that nightmare-fueled, cursed forest. He's back on the scene, combing through every inch of the place once again. Carrie Sky, the head of the hunter squad, steps up to deliver some heavy news. Lately, their traps have been absolutely swamped with an explosion of wild fangs. Crow breaks it down. With the Labird population plummeting, the wild fangs have lost their favorite bait and will finally stop stalking them toward the village, giving everyone a golden opportunity to safely hoard resources and cash out big. Crow pushes them to scout the Labird traps next, and it's not long before the cages stuffed with Labirds finally come into view. The trap lures them in with healing grass, but the second their combined weight hits the limit, the door slams shut, locking them in forever. Carrie Sky speaks up, asking if it's finally time to start rounding up the prisoners. They were just making their rounds checking the traps when something totally bizarre caught Crow's eye. Scanning the perimeter, he spotted something that definitely didn't belong there. He took one look and immediately suspected he'd stumbled right into another one of those insane fong traps. But as he leaned in for a closer look, the truth hit him like a truck. It wasn't what he thought at all. Right there in the trap was a tiny, fluffy white cub, totally knocked out and still clutching a bone in its mouth. This beast was unlike any monster Carrie Sky had ever laid eyes on. But looking at its small frame and soft features, it was obvious this thing was still just a baby. Crow finally triggers his appraisal skill to see exactly what he's dealing with. Just as the cub wakes up with a tiny whimper, the stats flash. It's a female, the literal offspring of Lavini Fong. This is a secondary ice wolf species that usually haunts the most brutal, frozen mountain peaks. These things are insanely rare, and finding even one is like hitting the jackpot. Once this little pup grows up, she's going to be a straight-up rank A powerhouse. And get this. Legend says that when it dies, it actually gives birth to an exact clone of itself to keep the cycle going. Crow immediately feeds the intel back to the rest of the hunter squad. Karski's face goes stone cold as the gravity of the situation sinks in. He'd heard the chilling whispers at the guild about the Lavini Fong. a legendary ice wolf so deadly that anyone who catches a glimpse of it never makes it back alive. The rest of the hunters started losing their cool, whispering in terror at the sight of this absolute nightmare. Crow stayed silent, his mind racing. If this thing was really just a cub, he almost went for it, but then he suddenly froze. The appraisal dropped a bombshell. When this creature dies, it instantly births a clone, which meant the parent was probably rotting somewhere close by. The silver cub stared up at him and let out a tiny, heart-wrenching cry. Crow reached down and gently rested his hand on its head. If they just let it go, there's no way it would survive on its own. But if it did make it, it could grow into a monster that comes back to haunt them. Crow scoops the silver cub into his arms, and even with the hunters looking nervous, he decides he's bringing it straight back to Nest Village. The hunters were absolutely floored, their faces pale with pure shock. Carrie Sky immediately pushed back, screaming that an A-rank beast is no joke and definitely not something you play around with. Crow gave a sharp nod, fully aware that he was staring death in the face. He wasn't going to pull the trigger just yet. He needed to talk strategy with Seabass first. But even with a plan in mind, one massive question was still eating at him. What the hell was a creature like this doing in the middle of the cursed forest? This thing belongs in the freezing snow, not a place like this. Crow figured it must have prowled all the way down from the jagged peaks of the Krugaze Mountains. Deep down, he was desperately praying they could find a way to end this without having to take a life. Meanwhile, back at the village, things were a whole different story. You could feel the tension vibrating in the air like a ticking time bomb. The entire village was huddled around the body, staring down in absolute horror. The hulking, pale carcass of a massive fallen beast. Crow's jaw hit the floor as he stared up at this absolute unit, a 7-meter-tall beast that completely dwarfed him. His brothers swarmed him with cheers, absolutely stoked to see him back in one piece. But Crow just stood there frozen, demanding to know what a corpse was doing lying right at their feet. He explains that he stumbled upon the beast deep in the cursed forest earlier that day, and, smelling a payday for its rare materials, hauled the massive thing back by carriage. Crow just stands there in dead silence, his eyes locked onto the massive, lifeless body of the demon. Looking down at the tiny cub snoozing in his arms, a heavy realization hits Crow. That giant wolf they found was almost certainly this little guy's parent. Right then, Seabass steps onto the scene, and his eyes immediately lock onto exactly what Crow is holding. Seabass was absolutely floored the moment he realized that creature was actually a baby Levine Falm. It all clicked in a flash. That massive legendary beast they'd found was actually the cub's parent. Crow dropped the hammer, confirming Seabass's worst fears. For better or worse, he wasn't about to just leave that cub to rot. In fact, he wanted to bring it home and raise it right in the middle of the village. Completely overwhelmed, Seabass could only slap a hand to his face in total defeat. Seabass dropped the news that they had to report everything to Lord Pheasant, catching Crow off guard since that's his own father. But Seabass made it clear that an A-rank monster is such a massive deal, they might end up taking this all the way to the king. Crow felt the crushing weight of the situation as things took a sharp turn for the worse, making him wonder if taming a monster was even a sane idea. Sure, Labird was technically a monster, but that low-rank bird was nothing compared to this new threat. The Levine Fong? That beast was in a league of its own. Out of nowhere, the cup suddenly snapped to life. It lunged right out of Crow's arms and tore off, leaving Crow screaming as he scrambled to give chase. Outside, the village square was absolutely buzzing, with everyone firing up the grills and diving into a massive feast. Kentucky was just minding his business, grabbing a snack, when the cub suddenly bolted straight toward him. Staring down at the tiny white wolf that just stopped dead in its tracks, Kentucky could only mumble in complete confusion. Right as Crow finally manages to close the gap, the cub suddenly lunges forward and vacuums up Kentucky's entire meal in one bite, leaving both of them absolutely stunned. Right in the middle of the chaos, Rose strolls up munching on a drumstick, ready to chew Crow out for ruining dinner. But she stops dead in her tracks the second she spots that cup. Her drumstick hits the dirt as her eyes light up, and she immediately snatches up the tiny creature, totally lost in how freaking adorable it is. Watching her cradle the cub, Crow couldn't help but laugh internally at how this deadly swordswoman had such a massive soft spot for fluffy creatures. Right as a beaming Rose turned to ask what the little guy actually was, the second Crow revealed it was a red cup from a Levine Fong. Rose stood there with her gears turning, trying to wrap her head around the truth. He let out a scream of pure shock. How could a monster this terrifying be here? But Crow quickly stepped in to explain how he'd tracked it down in the heart of the demon forest. Rose held the tiny pup close, her voice trembling as she asked if that corpse they found back in the demon forest was its mother. Crow gave a grim nod, confirming the heartbreaking truth. Rose's heart sank as she realized this poor little creature was now completely alone. But Crow wasn't about to abandon it, deciding right then and there to take the cub under his wing for now. Rose's eyes sparkled with pure hype as she begged to give the little guy a name, drawing inspiration from its fiery red coat and Lavinifong roots. She thrust it high into the air, shouting its name with a massive, hyped-up grin. And right on cue, Lavi-chun bursts onto the scene. Crow caught her reaction and flashed a satisfied smirk. It's a Lavinifong, so naming it Lavi is a total no-brainer. It's a simple name, but it gets the job done. Rose was absolutely beaming as she shoveled plate after plate of food into the hungry pup. Crow watched the mountain of empty plates reach the sky, grumbling to himself about the absolute black hole this thing had for a stomach. Right then, Kentucky rushes in panicking that their Labird meat stash is almost bone dry, leaving Crow absolutely floored while the cubs just flash him a grin and cheer happily. Buckle up, because we're diving straight into Chapter 6. Rose hovered right over Crow, watching him snooze his life away even though the lunch bell had already rung. Crow finally lurched upright, groggily mumbling her name while he was still half-trapped in a dream. He lets out a massive yawn, realizing he's completely hopeless at waking up on time without Sebastian around. Especially since his butler had hitched a ride to Bird Garden in Stuart's carriage just yesterday. He headed out to give Crow's father the lowdown on Ravi, and per Crow's orders, he was also there to explain the truth behind that insane A-rank potion. Sebastian wasn't due back for another month, trailing along with Stuart's caravan. Crow turned to Rose, asking why she hadn't headed into the demon forest with his owl-faced older brother. Rose beamed at him, explaining that while she was dying to go, she figured her best bet was to hang back and keep a close eye on Ravi for a while. Crow got the hint and offered to whip up some lunch before his afternoon shift, but that just made Rose wonder what kind of work he was actually hiding. Crow lays out the plan to build a massive reservoir and tells her she's more than welcome to jump in and help if she's down. Rose was all in, hyped to tag along and finally see his alchemy skills in action. As Crow was busy whipping up a meal, he asked how long she planned on sticking around Nest Village, and Rose made it clear. She wasn't going anywhere until the next swordsmanship tournament. Crow realized the tournament was a whole year away, meaning Rose was sticking around for the long haul, and her sheer dedication totally blew him away. While she watched him work his magic in the kitchen, Rose couldn't help but gush over his insane cooking skills. Crow realized just how much easier hunting had become with the crew by his side. And feeling a wave of gratitude, he whipped the lid off the pot to announce that dinner was finally served. He's getting a total kick out of seeing Rose and Ravi practically drooling over the food, and the second he serves the feast, Ravi lets out a hype-filled yelp of pure excitement. Back at the reservoir site, Crow is finally regrouping with the crew, Rose, Ravi, and Wagner. Wagner gave Crow a massive shout-out for backing him up on the project. Crow just gave a confident nod, telling them they could always bet on him to deliver. Rose was completely floored, demanding to know if he was really planning to solo the entire thing. She slumped onto the dirt, staring out at the massive wasteland and realizing this job was going to take an absolute eternity. Crow didn't say a word, but in his head he was totally on the same page. This place was freaking enormous, stretching out as far as the eye could see. But he quickly shook off the doubt, knowing his alchemy could pull off miracles that most people couldn't even dream of. Dropping to his knees, he plans out a massive 5-meter deep pit with a shallow edge, then slams his hand down and shouts, "Refining excavate," to trigger his transmutation magic. Right then, the ground starts shaking like crazy as massive slabs of rock and dirt explode into the air and the debris rain down, stacking into these massive perfect mounds all over the place. The massive excavation was finished in the absolute blink of an eye. Rose stood there in total shock, her jaw hitting the floor at the sight. Crow already had a plan to recycle all that dirt to beef up the riverbanks later on. Now it was time to harden the earth to make sure not a single drop of water could leak through. Crow thrusts his arm forward and channels his energy, triggering his next transmutation, the refining air cannon. A massive gale exploded outward, leaving Rose jaw-dropped as she realized even the wind itself was part of his insane alchemy. Crow flashed back to mastering the air cannon, the second big move he learned right after the mud wall. And since air is literally everywhere, it became his most versatile and reliable weapon. He'd already put this power to work by hardening the foundations of the entire village, making it his absolute secret weapon for every major build. Better yet, this thing was a total beast in a fight, and he still remembers the time he unleashed his air cannon to absolutely blast the bandits raiding the steward's caravan. He fires off one final massive blast to end the fight for good. Finally finished, he swiped the sweat from his brow and looked up to see what he'd accomplished. He peered straight down into the massive gaping crater he'd just blasted into the earth. Rose was absolutely floored, admitting she'd never seen alchemy in the flesh, and after Crow pulled off a feat way bigger and faster than she ever imagined, she turned to him and asked, "So, what's the plan now?" Crow broke down his master plan to bridge the reservoir with the river's tributary and stockpile a massive supply of water. Rose's head was absolutely spinning, struggling to even wrap her mind around the sheer scale of what he was proposing. He didn't stop there, detailing how he'd funnel the overflow back into the stream once the levels peaked to prevent a total disaster. And for the final touch, he was going to link the entire operation into a high-tech drainage system. Rose admits the plan sounds like a massive headache, but she knows Crow is so cracked he could pull it off in a heartbeat. She keeps the hype train rolling, gushing about how his alchemy skills are straight-up legendary. She's even convinced he's got what it takes to climb the ladder and dominate high society. Hearing all that praise, Crow just hits her with a confident smirk. He was living his absolute best life, but what really fueled him was seeing the villagers' smiles get brighter and brighter every single day. Rose was absolutely floored by his words, realizing right then and there that he'd become a completely different person. She flashes a warm smile, telling him straight up that she's a huge fan of the man he's finally become. Next, they brought the reservoir back to life and completely overhauled the village's messy sewage and drainage systems. Seeing his progress, Crow couldn't help but ask if he'd really changed that much. Rose shot back that the old Crow used to be a way bigger brat than he is now. Thanks to his grind, everyone in the village could finally enjoy a hot bath at home and, the best part, actual flushing toilets. To handle the nasty business of sewage and drainage, Crow decided to put his faith entirely in the slimes. These little guys would gobble up all that wastewater and spit out nothing but pure, crystal-clear water. Wagner walks right up to Crow and gives him some major props for all that insane grinding. He leaned in and whispered that the construction racket was so loud you could hear it all the way from the village. Crow gave a clumsy apology, promising that the work was finished without a hitch so he could finally get some rest. Then, Crow dropped the real bombshell. They finally had working baths and actual flushing toilets. Wagner's face lit up with pure joy, declaring it the absolute best news he'd heard in his life. Out of nowhere, Ravi's body snaps to attention as he lunges out of Rose's grip and lets out a piercing howl. Rose spun around to ask what was up, but Crow was already tracking Ravi's gaze, only to find the pup barking like crazy at the edge of the cursed forest. Suddenly, a heavy, bone-shaking rumble surged across the entire landscape. Lurking in the shadows of the forest edge, those black-horned beasts were letting out low, menacing growls. Massive pitch-black monsters suddenly loomed on the horizon. AOL peered through his telescope, his heart sinking as he realized the situation was spiraling out of control. A massive herd of black buffalo was charging straight for the cursed forest, and judging by the earth-shaking thunder of their hooves, there had to be well over 1,000 of them. The massive stampede thundered forward, smashing through every barricade and flattening everything in its path. And yeah, that even includes the monsters snagged in his traps. He's willing to give him props for now, but don't think he's fully convinced. Those beasts are distracted by the easy prey for now, but it's only a matter of time before they storm Nest Village, so he steps up to take command. Owl barked out a high-stakes plan to the swift archers, ordering Sifa to incinerate everything with her ultimate fire spell while Nelsis and the team prepared to haul her back to the village to alert Kuro the second she tapped out. Everyone's freaking out about the forest catching fire, but Owl shuts them down, insisting that taking out the black buffalo is the only thing that matters. Plus, a huge blast of magic would basically be a flare gun telling Kuro and the others that things have gone south. When asked about his next move, Al simply unsheathed his blade with a look of absolute determination. He was ready to hold the line, redlining his enhancement magic to keep pace with the stampede while betting everything on Kuro to protect the village. Meanwhile, Crow and his crew were still scratching their heads, totally clueless about what was going down. Ravi was totally losing it, barking his head off like there was no tomorrow. Crow found Rava's sudden chillness super suspicious. But before he could say a word, a massive explosion ripped through the forest. Rose freaks out and demands to know where that came from, while Crow stands there paralyzed before realizing it's fire magic, and he's betting it's Sifa's work. Rose knew right away that magic on this scale meant a massive threat was closing in. Crow didn't hesitate, ordering Wagner to round up every last villager and check if anyone was still stuck outside the walls. Wagner didn't waste a single second and jumped straight to work. Crow was still reeling from the shock when the swift archers burst out of the tree line, and one look at their faces told him the news was nothing but bad. They frantically screamed at Crow to get out of there before things got ugly. Crow was seriously worried and demanded an update. So Yord dropped the bad news. A massive stampede of black buffalo had just swarmed the cursed forest, and if they weren't stopped, Nest Village was going to be wiped off the map. Now, don't get it twisted. One black buffalo is just a flaming beast, but when they pack together, their power level hits a whole new tier of dangerous. With over 1,000 of these things, we're looking at a massive A-rank threat, and Yord drops the bombshell on Crow. Awell stayed behind in the woods, fighting off the entire herd solo just to make sure this message got delivered. The shocking truth dropped like a bomb, leaving the entire group in stunned silence. A trembling Rose couldn't believe Lord Owl was actually brave enough, or crazy enough to face that nightmare all by himself. Yord snapped them back to reality, screaming for everyone to round up the villagers and run while Owl was still holding the line. He admitted the village was a goner, but reminded everyone that as long as they survived, they could rebuild from the ashes. The rest of the swift archers hesitated, their hearts sinking, but they finally gave him the nod. They knew that with Crow leading the charge, their home would definitely rise again. Rose stares down Crow, but he stays dead silent, completely lost in the chaos of his own mind. Those words finally hit home. A village isn't just wood and stone. It's the heartbeat of its people. And that's exactly why he knew he could bring it all back from the ashes. He could survive the onslaught, but the helpless villagers? They're as good as dead. These folks had been through a literal hell of constant monster attacks, and just when they finally caught a break, having everything ripped away again would be a total soul-crusher. The pressure was absolutely crushing him. But Crow realized that if they could pull off this win, it might finally give the villagers the spark of hope they needed to believe in a future again. Remembering the swift archer's orders to get everyone to the next town, Crow finally made his move. He barked at Yord to take charge and escort every single villager to safety immediately. Yord saluted the command, but he had to ask, what exactly was Crow planning to do himself? Crow didn't back down, deciding right then and there to hold the line and face the Black Buffalo solo. That bombshell announcement left Yord and his entire squad completely frozen in shock. Before Crow could even get a word out, Rose stepped up and volunteered to stay right by his side. You could see the panic on Crow's face, but Rose stood her ground, reminding him of how much love these villagers had shown her. There was no way she was turning her back on them now, not after everything they'd done for her. Crow poured his entire soul into building this village, and she wasn't about to let some mindless monsters tear his legacy to shreds. She gives Crow a playful jab to the shoulder, reminding him that they didn't grind through all that training just to turn tail and run. The second things got real. Her ride-or-die loyalty hits Crow right in the feels, and he pours his heart out to show her some serious appreciation. He whipped around to Yord, demanding to know if the Grand Needle technique actually had what it takes to bring down that massive black buffalo. Yord realized these beasts were built like absolute tanks, leaving Crow sweating bullets over whether his ultimate magic would even leave a scratch. He grills Rose for any heavy-hitting earth magic that could turn the tide, and just as she's about to answer, she freezes as a wild idea suddenly hits her. Suddenly, a memory from an old picture book flashed in her mind, a secret spell to construct a massive golem powered by raw magical energy. But Yord's got a major concern. He knows controlling a golem takes a legendary, bank-breaking magic stone. And Rose can only laugh because there's no way they're finding something that rare in the middle of nowhere. Catching everyone off guard, Crow drops a bombshell. That legendary stone is real, and it's hidden right under their noses. Moments later, the gang is huddled at the edge of the field while Rose inspects the mysterious gem Crow just pulled out. She takes one look and confirms the truth. It's a genuine crimson magic stone. Crow then drops the bombshell that Hawksama himself handed it over right before he even reached Nest Village. And honestly, it's like Hawksama saw this exact moment coming from a mile away. Rose flashed a nervous grin, clearly doubting Crow could actually pull off making a golem. And as he dropped to his knees in the dirt, she demanded to know why he picked this exact spot for the job. Crow kept the real answer locked deep in his mind. The secret was the soil. It was absolutely surging with raw mana, the ultimate cheat code for high-level crafting. Rose soaked it all in, her expression a wild mix of, "Wait, really?" and "No way that's true." But even with a setup this good, Crow couldn't shake the feeling that this whole plan might just blow up in their faces. But he instantly shook off the hesitation, knowing he had to pull this off. He told himself there was no room for error. This had to work. Ever since he arrived at Nest Village, his alchemy had been his ultimate lifeline, especially that earth magic he'd grinded and perfected more than anything else. With a lifetime of experience and those legendary red magic stones in hand, Crow was ready to work his magic, sinking into a deep trance to visualize a massive titan that moved as effortlessly as his own body. Towering over everyone with limbs just like a human's, this was the ultimate golem. a massive masterpiece forged from his raw skill and wildest imagination. The moment the crafting kicks off, raw magical energy surges out, hunting for a spark. Suddenly, the ground right beneath his palm literally shatters wide open. Crow flings the magic stone, and it instantly erupts into a dazzling shower of sparks. It's finally time to pull the trigger on the endgame. He's completely wiped and drenched in sweat, realizing that one move just incinerated half of his entire mana pool. Suddenly, a colossal stone titan erupts from the earth right in front of them, held together by pure magical energy. Between its man-like frame and those burning, glowing eyes, this thing radiated a godlike pressure that was nothing short of majestic. Rose's heart sank as she stared up at that massive mountain of stone now completely under Crow's thumb, buried deep within the heart of a massive, dense forest. Owl is still right in the thick of it, trading blows in a high-stakes clash against the black buffaloes. Dropping to one knee amidst the carnage, he scanned the bodies, desperate to see if this slaughter bought his team the time they needed. Suddenly, a massive silhouette loomed on the horizon, and though I was stunned for a second, I quickly flashed a confident smirk, knowing this had Crow's name written all over it. Meanwhile, he's staring down a golem so massive it literally blocks out the sun. Crow stood there doubting if this massive construct would even budge an inch. He raised his hand, ready to see if this thing was actually going to roar to life. Without a second's delay, the massive stone titan rumbled straight into action. It exploded with raw power, launching itself high into the sky. It touched down with total elegance, but the impact sent a shockwave through the ground that left Crow absolutely stunned. It moved with eerie mechanical precision, reacting to his every thought like it was hardwired directly into his brain. It moved with lethal precision, perfectly in sync with his every thought, as Rose realized this massive titan absolutely dwarfed any normal golem. She screams that this isn't some basic toy. It's a massive golem, leaving a totally lost Crow wondering how he's even supposed to tell the difference when he's never seen a normal one. He wasn't about to just walk away, so he dove deeper to find out what was really going on. He immediately popped his appraisal skill to see exactly what kind of monster he was dealing with. The scan confirms it. This massive golem is a legendary mythic-tier masterpiece. Its creator pulls every single string, and it's ranked right alongside the deadliest top-tier threats in the entire organization. Forged through elite silver and gold techniques, this beast holds the authority of a high-ranking official, and officially hits that terrifying S-rank status among the Demon Kings. Crow finally admits Rose was spot on. This thing is a straight-up massive golem. His appraisal reveals something insane. As long as it's fed mana, this beast will never stop moving. Rose is absolutely floored, reminding him that regular folks can't just top off their magic reserves whenever they want. Now Crow's just as baffled, questioning why his powers always have to be so ridiculously over the top. Right as the tension peaks, Yord and a squad of hunters burst onto the scene, with Yord's jaw hitting the floor at the absolute beast Crow managed to create. Crow doesn't waste a second on the praise, immediately demanding to know if the villagers are safe, and Yord confirms that while Nelson and Sifa are handling the evacuation, the rest of the crew is staying right here to join the fight. He swore with everything he had that they'd protect the village together, leaving Crow completely stunned and at a loss for words. After tossing them a quick thanks, he lets the squad know he's got a master plan and needs their help. And without a second thought, the whole crew is all in. They didn't waste a single second, stationing the hunters high on the walls to rain down a lethal storm of arrows and heavy stones. They'd completely surrounded Nest Village with dry wheat straw, turning the perimeter into a massive tinderbox. By raining down fire arrows to ignite the straw, they could panic those massive black buffaloes and force them to change course. Crow sized up the massive rectangular trench they'd carved out right in front of the village. They were racing against the clock, and that half-baked trench was nowhere near ready for the chaos to come. That'll at least blunt the buffalo's massive charge, while Rose stays cool as ice, stroking the calm Ravi sitting right by her side. Meanwhile, the village hunters are hauling their gear and sprinting across the earthen walls to get into position. They rigged up combat platforms right on the edge of the demon forest, giving the warriors a solid and way safer footing for the fight ahead. A hunter screams down from the wall that they're locked and loaded, and Yord wastes no time relaying the green light to Crow, now that the stage is set. Rose and Ravi hunkered down next to Crow, bracing for the storm as the thunderous roar of approaching hooves shook the very ground beneath them. A stampede of black buffaloes was barreling toward the village, looking like an unstoppable wall of pure destruction. Rose screams from the top of the ramparts, warning everyone that the buffaloes have finally arrived. Down on the front lines, Crow snaps into action without missing a beat. He doesn't hesitate for a second, barking an order to the massive golem to... He barrels forward, steamrolling right through the massive wave of enemies. The massive titan followed orders, lunging forward and hurling itself headfirst into the sea of monsters. The ground literally shatters as it slams into the herd, launching those massive buffalo into the air like ragdolls in a cyclone. High atop the earthen walls, Rose, Yord, and the village hunters were completely paralyzed, their jaws hitting the floor as they watched the absolute carnage unfold. Crow scanned the carnage and realized that first charge from the golem just wiped out 50 buffaloes in an instant. Elsewhere on the field, Il cut through one of the monsters with surgical precision. Rose caught sight of him and finally breathed again, gasping his name in pure relief. She shoves Ravi into Crow's arms and declares she's jumping into the fray, ordering him to keep that pup safe at all costs. Crow's shouting for her to watch her back, but Rose is already white-knuckling her sword with total confidence before diving headfirst into the madness. Crow looks over at Ravi, noticing the pup's ears twitching as he lets out a scared little whimper. He pulled Ravi close, promising him there was no need to sweat it because Rose was a total powerhouse. Scanning the carnage, Crow realized this was officially all-out war, and if he wanted to thin out the black buffaloes, he'd have to unleash their ultimate trump card, the golem. But that first strike didn't catch every single one of those monsters. A massive chunk of the pack broke away and started barreling straight for the village. Crow whipped around to Yord, urgently shouting about the danger heading their way. Yord didn't need to be told twice. He got the message immediately. Without a moment's hesitation, he barked the order for the hunters to fire up their arrows. The squad reacted instantly, sparking their weapons into a roaring blaze, unleashing them right into the path of the stampeding buffaloes. Those flaming arrows streak across the sky and slam into the field. Fire erupts all over the battlefield, leaving those monsters completely dazed and confused. Total chaos erupts as the buffaloes lose their minds, their ranks completely shattering as they scramble for their lives. A massive chunk of their forces plummets straight into the hidden trench they dug earlier. Seeing the trap work perfectly, Yord lets out a victory roar, knowing they've finally got them right where they want them. He didn't waste a single second, ordering his men to rain down massive boulders that crushed the trapped buffaloes as their agonizing screams echoed across the field. But don't catch your breath yet, because this fight was just getting started. A fresh wave of black buffaloes suddenly split from the herd, regrouping with a level of intelligence that's honestly terrifying. They steered clear of the flames and started flanking the area, hunting for a new way to break through. Crow was left speechless as they pulled off a genius tactical maneuver, blitzing right through a tiny opening on his flank. They spotted a massive vulnerability, a section of the wall left completely exposed without a trench. The buffalo charged straight for the barrier, slamming their horns into the earth and stone with earth-shattering force. But little did they know, Crow had already seen this coming and was one step ahead. He knew right then and there. Letting them through simply wasn't an option. Gritting his teeth, he thrust his hand forward, pouring every ounce of his power back into the wall. The stone groaned and fused together, sealing every crack shut just as the enemy's relentless barrage slammed into it. Meanwhile, a blur of speed tears through the carnage, carving up those black buffaloes with surgical precision. Another beast gets dropped in the blink of an eye, and this time, it's a massive owl. Back to back and completely surrounded, Rose lets out a sigh of relief to have him back in the fight, while he gasps for air, admitting they're barely holding the line for now. But you could hear the raw nerves shaking in his voice. If this keeps up, they're going to hit their breaking point real soon. Meanwhile, at the village wall, Crow was working overtime to bolster their defenses. But deep down, a cold sense of dread was starting to set in. The wall was holding for now, but Crow knew they were living on borrowed time. He started second-guessing himself, wondering if it was time to pull the giant Golem out of the demon forest. But he's running on fumes, his mana tank is bone dry, and he's absolutely seething because he just wants one big move to erase them all from existence. Just then, a stroke of genius hits him like a truck, and with fire in his eyes, he grabs Ravi tight because he finally knows exactly what to do. This insane brawl rages on, and at this point it's still anyone's game. Tiny but lethal, Rose lunges forward and slams her blade into a buffalo as blood sprays everywhere. Gasping for air, she grits her teeth and digs her heels into the dirt, bracing for the next round. Out of nowhere, an arrow slams into the dirt right at their feet, and I'm snatching up the attached note immediately to see what it says. He leaped to his feet and shouted out for Rose. They barked out that the order came straight from Crow. Retreat now, and Rose didn't need to be told twice. Back at the village, Crow drops to one knee and presses his palm into the dirt, his mind racing for a way to keep the herd from bolting, so he's carving out a massive direct highway to bridge the gap between the village and the deadly demon forest. The ground literally erupts with raw magical power the moment he lets out a roar. Now it's all about the refining process to turn this chaos into a perfect road. He slams down an earth wall just as the ground trembles under the weight of a massive buffalo stampede. Massive walls of earth erupted from the ground, boxing in the trail. Crow clenched his jaw, the sheer strain written all over his face. His mana was bone dry, running on absolute fumes. He let out a low growl, cursing the desperate situation he was in. But this was the play. He finally had the perfect funnel to herd that massive swarm exactly where he wanted them. He yanks the massive gigant golem back, but right at that exact moment, that massive stone titan slams into the ground with an absolute earth-shattering boom. It thundered forward, locking eyes with the absolute world of pain headed its way. Even with that thing looming over them, the buffaloes weren't slowing down for a second. Crow let out a massive war cry, giving his squad the green light to absolutely demolish the black buffaloes. With the goal in sight, they're finally exploding into action. He slams right into the heart of the chaos with a roar. Isle and the rest of the crew let out a desperate shout, their hearts sinking as they feared the absolute worst for Crow. But he wasn't about to quit. He was seeing this through to the bitter end. He roared at the top of his lungs that he was finishing this right here, right now. Just then, the golem's massive arm came swinging down like a wrecking ball. It's snatching up everything in sight, hurling massive buffaloes and jagged wreckage into the sky like they're nothing. To hunt down the few beasts that managed to slip past the walls, the golem finally marched out into the wild. Every single step it takes sends massive shockwaves ripping through the earth. The buffalo were completely spooked, scattering in a total panic as they bolted the other way. As the dust finally settles, Crow collapses to his knees, clutching Ravi tight in his arms. Lungs burning for air, the realization hits him. They actually pulled it off. The village was safe at last, and with that final weight off his shoulders, his world goes black as he passes out cold. The next morning rolls around and Crow finally blinks his eyes open, squinting as the bright sunlight hits his face. He jolts awake, head spinning as he scans the room. Could he actually be back home? Then, the brutal images of the slaughter come crashing back like a tidal wave. It all clicks. The last thing he remembers is his body giving out and the world going pitch black. Rose and Ravi were snuggled up right beside him, fast asleep and totally at peace. Looking around, Crow realized Rose had been the one nursing him back to health, and she could feel the exact moment he finally opened his eyes. Ravi snaps awake and lunges into his arms, crying out with joy while practically burying his face in him. Crow gives the little guy a soft smile, thanking him for being so worried about his well-being. It isn't long before Rose finally blinks her eyes open and joins them. It's been a full day since the chaos of the buffalo hunt, and Crow is finally back in peak condition with his magic fully restored. Miraculously, every single fighter who threw down in the battle walked away without a scratch. And with the coast finally clear, the evacuated villagers came flooding back home to Nest Village. Peace finally returned to the city, and every trace of the wreckage left behind was completely scrubbed away. A little while later, Crow surveys the scene and mutters, "Yeah, I guess this works," as he watches the massive golem chilling peacefully right in the heart of its own private domain. Right on cue, Rose bursts onto the scene, clutching Ravi, and shouts his name at the top of her lungs. She flashed him a grin, thrilled to see him in such high spirits, but then she pointed at the massive golem and asked why it was just chilling in the field, so Crow explained he didn't want it blocking the way and just had it take a seat at the entrance. Since he's already juicing up the crops every morning, keeping the golem in the fields lets him charge it up at the same time, ensuring they're locked and loaded for any sudden crisis. Way out in the fields, the farm kids dropped everything to point at the golem, losing their minds over how bizarre the giant creature looked. But out of nowhere, Wagner comes charging in, absolutely panicking as he screams for Crow, and it was a total emergency, and Crow immediately went on high alert, demanding to know what went wrong this time, only for Wagner to reveal that disaster had struck the reservoir Crow had just finished building. An entire army of lizard men was finally starting to swarm together. The second that news dropped, Crow and Rose were both frozen solid in their tracks. Just past the quiet village, a crew of jacked lizard men are putting in serious work by the water, hammering together wooden shacks and hauling massive crates of fish while they swap stories. Watching from the shadows, Crow mutters that those things have gotta be lizard men. The thing is, he's never actually seen one in the flesh until this very moment. He turns to Rose, asking if she's got any clue what they're dealing with. Rose just stares back, totally stunned that he's actually this clueless. She explains that these lizard men aren't just swamp-dwelling reptiles. They walk on two legs and can actually speak our language, proving they're a far cry from your average brainless monster. She casually points out that he should have known this from the jump, and Crow finally nods as the realization hits him. He started sweating because it looked like these lizard men were moving in for good. but the tension spiked when one of them spotted him and asked if they were the ones living behind the walls. And just like that, it's confirmed. A lizard man steps forward and introduces himself as Chichikaka, the big boss of the Kapoku tribe. This 30-year-old river dweller leads a massive, peaceful tribe that does everything they can to avoid a fight. He reveals that some nasty marsh-dwelling lizard men have been bullying them so hard they were forced to abandon their homes. These guys are absolute masters of the river, sticking to a chill diet of fish and veggies. Crow couldn't get over Chichikaka's heavy lizard man accent, but he leaned over to Rose and whispered that the guy actually seemed like a total sweetheart. And while Rose agreed, she was still scratching her head over why they'd even come to this place. Crow steps up and introduces himself as the official leader representing the village. Chichikaka explains that they're actually from the Kapoku tribe, who used to live further upstream. But after a brutal war with the Dauphin tribe from the marshlands, they were forced to flee for their lives until they finally stumbled upon this spot. He called it a total paradise, a hidden gem uncovered the second the river surged forward to reveal this new land. With his eyes practically glowing with excitement, he announced right then and there that he was moving in. Crow just stood there feeling incredibly awkward, wondering how a simple pond could ever be called a paradise. After all, he'd only built the thing to make sure the village didn't run out of water. Chichikaka just smirks and calls him out on the lie, pointing out the pond didn't even exist a few days ago, and claiming it's actually a divine gift, meant only for the Kapoka tribe. He stared Crow down, and admitted that if he really pulled this off, he was basically a god-tier sorcerer. Crow's expression darkened as he sank deep into thought. It was obvious the lizard man didn't believe a human was capable of building something this insane. And to make matters worse, he was spiraling over the threat of a rival tribe moving in right next door. Right then, Crow makes a massive call, promising Chichikaka he'll build him a real home before ordering the whole squad to pack up and move out. After a quick 10-minute trek, they finally burst onto a massive, wide-open field. Crow double-checks if they've cleared enough ground to keep the village safe, and Wagner confirms they're in the clear. The locals won't be bothered at all. Chichikaka scanned the barren wasteland with a skeptical scowl, demanding to know how they'd ever turn this dry dirt into a pond. But Crow just knelt down, pressed his hand to the earth, and coolly promised it'd be finished in a flash. Clearly on edge, Chichikaka begged to hunker down by the pond for just a little longer, since his crew was absolutely battered and needed time to recover. Wagner shut that down immediately, flat out refusing and insisting there was no way they could stick around. Feeling the sting of defeat, Chichikaka stumbled back and cried out, "What the heck are we even supposed to do now?" Right then, Crow stands up and declares it's finally over. Chichikaka just blinks, totally lost. What exactly is done? But his words are cut short as his jaw hits the floor in absolute shock. Right where there used to be nothing but dirt, a gleaming new village had suddenly appeared, with fresh huts all huddled around a crystal-clear man-made pond. The whole place was flawless, perfectly organized, and dead quiet. Chichikaka stood there frozen, his jaw dropping at the total transformation. The dead, empty wasteland had finally come back to life. A sanctuary his people could finally plant their roots and call home. Crow revealed he'd fortified the pond with a massive earthen wall to keep it totally hidden from prying eyes, and he even went the extra mile by building some huts for the lizard men to settle into. He whipped around to Chichikaka and smirked. "So, how's that for a show?" Chichikaka was completely paralyzed, his jaw hanging open in pure shock. A slow, heavy breath escaped his lungs as she suddenly lunges forward and seizes Crow's hands, gushing that he's got to be some legendary high-tier mage to build a literal paradise like this. Crow just rubs his cheek, looking totally sheepish as he tries to play it down, insisting he's not a magician or anything close to it. Wasting zero time, Chichikaka bolts off to round up the rest of the crew and bring them back immediately. The Kapoko tribe was absolutely losing it over the stunning pond and the new home Crow built, and they've officially decided to pack their bags and move in for good. To show their gratitude, they hooked Crow up with a massive haul of fresh river fish, making him realize that keeping these guys as allies would be a total game-changer for future trade. Nest Village is growing fast with 51 residents, and to counter that lizard man threat, they've just finished the Biont Call construction project. Plus, they've finally unlocked river fish as a brand new resource. A whole month flies by before Rose suddenly shows up at Crow's place with Owl and Swift Archer, announcing they're charging into the demon forest and leaving Ravi in his care for the time being. Crow flashed a grin, told them to watch their backs, and decided it was finally time to get down to business himself. His schedule was absolutely slammed that day, as he bounced between recharging the farm's mana and micromanaging the slime population at the water plant. He's scouring the massive walls and double-checking the playground gear to make sure every single piece is still in top shape. Once the last task was finally checked off, he and Ravi just hit the dirt, completely wiped out from the day's brutal grind. He let out a heavy sigh, grumbling about how absolutely exhausting this whole mess had become. Trying to carry this entire burden solo was finally starting to push him to his breaking point. But right at that moment, Ravi Bart stepped onto the scene. Crow's head snapped up as he caught sight of a figure marching straight toward him. A massive caravan came rolling in, making a grand entrance with all the flash of a parade. Crow's face beamed the second he realized that was Stuart's caravan rolling into view. The caravan ground to a halt, and Seabass and the steward were absolutely hyped the second they spotted Crow. Crow welcomes the group back with a massive grin and major props for their hustle. But just as Stuart's admiring how much the village has leveled up, he freezes, catching sight of something seriously weird on the horizon. He pointed toward the massive golem slumped in the field, looking totally lost. But Crow just gave a wry smirk and admitted things had gone south without spilling the full story. Crow brushes off the paperwork for now, telling Seabass to deal with the Ravi and potion reports later. He then pivots to Stuart, demanding an update on that special request he'd made earlier. Stuart gives a knowing nod and gestures toward a mysterious group of people waiting in the wings. "I've got them right here," he confirms. Stuart finally speaks up, revealing that he's actually an alchemist. Crow flashed back to Stuart's last trip to Nest Village, remembering how he'd been tasked with scouting for anyone ready to pack their bags and join their community. But out of everyone on their radar, the one they were absolutely dying to recruit was an alchemist. The master plan was to kick potion production into overdrive, and since the village was already swimming in top-tier herbs, a little training was all they needed to start churning out those elite B-rank brews. Stuart drops the bombshell that he's officially recruited 30 alchemists for the village, earning a massive thanks from Crow while Seabass just chills in the background, giving Ravi some wholesome head pats. Crow didn't waste a second, barking at Stuart to round up every last alchemist and line them up right in front of him. Stuart hesitated, admitting he just rounded them up as ordered without digging into their pasts, and nervously asked if that was going to be a problem. Crow just shook his head, knowing his appraisal skill let him see right through anyone in a heartbeat. Crow fires up his skill, scanning every face in the crowd. They look like a bunch of patient grinders who are ready to put in the work. But at first glance, not a single one of them has a power that screams special. But then, someone totally grabs his attention. A 14-year-old alchemist named Marika Krabins, who sports D-rank crafting skills and a wild special trait called the right claw of the cat. She's even packing a rank C sub-skill, quality preservation. With her striking dark hair, she absolutely dominated the room. Crow's jaw hit the floor as the full picture finally came into focus. This wasn't just any ordinary alchemist standing before him. This was Marika Krabins, a royal capital celebrity who only takes elite guild requests and works directly for the nobility. Most impressively, she has the rare talent to brew high-level B-rank potions. Wait a second. Did he just see a double skill in there too? Crow was left absolutely speechless by how cracked her stats were. Later that night in the village's outdoor eatery, Crow and Seabass huddle up while Ravi stuffs his face, with Crow apologizing for the holdup before diving straight into the mission report. Seabass admitted he'd already leaked everything to Crow's father, sparking a major sit-down between the Earl and the Duke of Rosenberg, a massive headache Crow saw coming a mile away as he let out a frustrated sigh. Earl Eldorado was firmly in the Rosenberg Duke's camp, so if things got messy on his turf, he couldn't lift a finger without their direct command. Seabass laid down the law. Those A-rank potions stay far away from the Commerce Guild because leaking that kind of power would put a massive target on Crow and the entire village. Instead, they were being shipped straight to the Duke, and Crow knew exactly what was up. These potions were the ultimate power play to tip the scales for the noble faction. Seabass delivers a grim update on the wreckage of Lavini Farm. But get this, even without any red tape, those remains are worth a staggering 100 million guile. Crow's jaw hit the floor at that insane amount of money, but he quickly shook it off to nervously ask what the deal was with Ravi. Seabass drops a massive bombshell. Ravi isn't even listed as a Lavini Fong on paper, but as a common silver Fong, and he suspects Crow's dad used a high-rank potion to bribe the Duke and bury her true identity. Bass reveals that after Crow's dad saw the sheer scale of a massive adult Lavini Fong, he gave Crow the total green light to raise one for himself. He put Bass in charge of the whole operation, making sure he looked after them like his life depended on it. His father's words hit Crow right in the heart, but he couldn't help but wonder, were they just hyped over the A-rank potions and that massive monster corpse, or was he finally earning their genuine trust? He flashed a confident grin, knowing that with his old man finally backing him up, he could go full throttle on building his domain without anything holding him back. Seabass asks what the game plan is, and Crow reveals he's gonna spend some time whipping his new alchemists into shape. Seabass points to the crew waiting by the fields, questioning if there's even a single powerhouse among the bunch. Crow's flashed a confident smirk, and confirmed that yeah, there really was one. Rewind 3 hours. After sizing up every last alchemist, Crow dragged them all out to the field to see if they actually had the skills to back it up. The second he declared himself the village leader, a raven-haired girl stepped out from the crowd to meet him head-on. Her curious gaze locked onto his as she stepped forward and introduced herself as Marika Clemens. Marika rushed over to Crow, practically vibrating with excitement as she asked if he was the actual god who brewed that insane potion. Crow was totally lost, so she explained that 10 days back, while she was still hanging with Stuart, she was absolutely floored by the potion in her hands, an impossibly tasty beer ink that had her dying to know who could have possibly crafted such a masterpiece. Stuart drops the bombshell that the gear was forged by Crow Eldorado, the kingpin of Nest Village, and while she's desperately trying to link the village's name to the birds, Stuart explained that Nest Village was scouting for alchemists to move in, and he straight up asked if she wanted to join the squad. Marika was dead set on reaching Nest Village, convinced it was her big chance to finally brew potions side by side with Crow. Finally, she looked them dead in the eye and declared she was going, no matter the cost. Crow flashed a sheepish grin as the dots finally connected, coming clean that he was the one who brewed the exact potion she'd chugged. Marika suddenly drops to her knees right in front of the other alchemists, desperate to know if he's actually a god. Crow figured she wasn't actually a bad person, just a total weirdo, but as Marika stood back up, she admitted there was something heavy on her mind. She spots some suspicious greenery, and realizes it's actually healing grass. And Crow backs her up, explaining that this village literally farms its own medicine right in the fields. The other alchemists were absolutely losing it. One guy shouted it was a total joke, a woman claimed she'd called it from the start, and another insisted that farming medicinal herbs was straight up impossible. Crow reveals that the best herbs only sprout where monsters lurk, so after finding mana in the dirt, he pumped the village fields full of magic to recreate the demon forest, leaving Marika to touch the soil in awe and whisper, "That's exactly what I'd expect from a god." He tops it off with a huge grin, hyped that with herbs this high quality, they can brew up some seriously top-tier potions. Even from a distance, Crow could tell she was a total oddball, but he quickly pointed out that the crystal-clear water from the Kilgis Mountains was the secret ingredient that pushed their potion quality through the roof. In Nest Village, anything below a C-rank potion was basically trash, and Crow made it clear that until everyone could craft B-rank masterpieces, they'd be stuck doing back-breaking farm work and chores to sharpen their alchemy game. Crow's challenge lit a fire under them, with one alchemist boldly swearing he could brew B-rank potions, while another demanded the dirty details on all the manual labor and village chores. While Marika lay there with her face pressed into the dirt, Crow barked at the alchemists that it was time to put their skills to the test immediately. He lunged forward, snatching up a handful of the magically charged earth with a single lightning-fast motion. Pure energy rippled through the terrain, leaving Marika absolutely speechless as she watched the spectacle unfold. In a total blur, the grass exploded into full bloom, pulsing with life and sending Marika stumbling back in absolute shock. Those tiny sprouts shot up into full-grown crops in the blink of an eye, and with a confident smirk, Crow told them he was just getting started, his hand glowing once more as he unleashed his next spell. Enriched produce. Suddenly, a massive wall of earth erupts from the ground, and Crow gives it a confident tap, explaining that he's infused it with magic to make it rock solid, and he can make it even tougher if he wants. The alchemist's jaws hit the floor as one of them muttered in total disbelief. So, that's what earth magic is really capable of. Crow flashes a cocky smirk, revealing that by fusing mana, he can reshape raw matter and even conjure pure magic out of nothingness. He breaks it down for them. Alchemy isn't just for mixing dusty potions, leaving Marika absolutely breathless as she gasps in pure awe. She dropped to her knees in total awe, calling Crow a straight-up god after realizing he'd just completely rewritten everything she knew about the future of alchemy. Totally flustered, Crow practically begged her to just use his real name for once. With that settled, Crow commanded everyone to start flooding the fields with pure magical energy. One by one, the alchemists hit the dirt, desperately scrambling to recreate the absolute miracle Crow just pulled off. Crow watched as the group desperately fumbled with their mana, knowing full well that mastering magic was going to be an absolute nightmare for these rookies. Then he looks over and sees Marika absolutely crushing it without even breaking a sweat. Thinking back on it all, Seabass flashed a smirk and admitted the feat was actually pretty legendary, hoping it would give Ease Crow a much-needed break. But then his expression shifted because there was still one final order of business to handle. He locked the swift archers in with a massive million-gil monthly salary. But this time, they weren't signing with the House of El Dorado. They were answering directly to Crow. Crow was all in since Swift Archer had been a total MVP for the squad, while Seabass kept the momentum going by bringing up that critical point from before. Owl needed to get ready for night school, so he hitched a ride back to Bird's Garden with the caravan, while Crow realized this was exactly how things were destined to go from the very beginning. It was gut-wrenching to see his big brother Owl head out, but more than anything, he was just thankful Owl had stuck by him this entire time, and he was dying to give him a proper thank you before he disappeared. Morning rolls around and we're right back at the workshop to see what's brewing. Marika's jaw hit the floor the second she stepped inside Crow's inner sanctum. The place was absolutely spotless, with rows of mysterious ingredient bottles lining the shelves in perfect order. Pro shows off the well right on the first floor, which is a total game changer for brewing potions whenever they need. Marika's eyes practically glowed with excitement as she shouted that she could brew potions for eternity, leaving Crow awkwardly sweating because they definitely didn't need that many. But he still gave her the green light to start crafting with the materials he'd already prepped. Sitting right there on the table was a jar of water with magica grass drifting inside. Crow knew that with these materials, he could brew a legendary A-rank potion, and he bet Marika had the skills to pull it off too. Marika takes a massive breath, slams her hands onto the jar, and unleashes her recovery chant, sending a surge of raw power through her fingertips that makes the water glow. The magic grass inside the jar starts swirling and bubbling like crazy before a massive explosion of light suddenly floods the entire room. Crow's jaw hit the floor as he stood there absolutely mesmerized by that glow is absolutely blinding. Could we seriously be staring down a legit A-rank? A few moments later, the blinding light finally dies down to reveal a high-tier B-rank magic recovery potion. Crow stared at the bottle in silence, mourning the absolute waste of what could have been. For a fleeting moment, the liquid had shimmered with the unmistakable glow of a legendary A-rank. But reality hit hard. It was just a B-rank, even if it was sitting right on the edge of greatness. Marika didn't care about the grade, though, as she grabbed Crow and started shaking him with pure hype. That shimmering white gold is the dead giveaway of an A-rank masterpiece. But can she actually pull it off? Or is she about to hit a wall? The second she crossed it into the divine realm, she started shaking him like crazy, making Ravi snap and bark in total protest. She snapped back to reality and blurted out an apology, admitting she'd totally lost her cool. Honestly, she was just way too hyped up to contain it. Crow's head was still spinning from her iron grip, and he started thinking her level of focus was actually kind of terrifying. Even so, they'd managed to flood the fields with magic in record time. A massive win by any standard. He gripped his head in disbelief because at this insane rate they'd be brewing A-rank potions in no time. But since the Commerce Guild won't even touch stuff that high tier, Marika needs to focus on churning out B-ranks for now. He told her it was a total bummer they didn't hit that A-rank on the first try, but they'd get there soon enough. So for now, they're sticking to the B-rank grind, and Marika is 100% on board. She gleefully announced that with his potion, she could pull a 3-day marathon, but a horrified Crow begged her to stop working herself into an early grave. Ravi let out a heavy sigh in the back, but Crow was already moving on, telling Marika he had a brand new mission for her that was a total departure from brewing potions. He was dying to see what other secret techniques she was hiding up her sleeve. Moments later, they're standing in the heart of the warehouse, staring down a literal sea of potion crates. Marika thrusts her hands forward and ignites her preservation skill. In an instant, a brilliant surge of light explodes, flooding every single inch of the room. This skill was the perfect power-up for her alchemy, letting them mass-produce potions that never spoil. And Crow realized that their days of keeping tiny stocks for the Merchant Guild were officially over. The sky was now the limit. Crow realizes Marika's totally tethered to the spot by that preservation magic, so he decides to lighten the mood with some pizza. And let's just say she's practically drowning in her own drool at the sight of it. The second she tastes it, she loses her mind, shouting about how those top-tier eggs and cheese are pure perfection. Even with the usual ingredients, this specific combo is a total game-changer. Crow's got eggs piling up and thinks it's time to sell. So Marika offers to use her preservation magic to keep them fresh and rake in a way better price. Crow double-checks if she's actually ready, but Marika doesn't flinch, begging him to let her help for the sake of the village. Crow thanks her and offers a reward, and Marika spins around with a smirk, telling him she's definitely gonna hold him to that. And he shot them a cheeky wink, promising to churn out 3 of those B-rank potions every single day. The alchemists just stood there outside the coop, totally mesmerized as Kentucky pampered and chatted with those Lalaboards like they were his own family. Marika's jaw dropped when the birds actually showed her some love. She never expected them to be this affectionate. Needing a serious change of pace, Crow spent the day leading the alchemists on a grand tour through the heart of Nest Village. Right now, Mariko is the only one who can actually whip up those beering potions. To forge the next generation of masters, Crow's been putting her students through a grueling gauntlet, forcing them to pump magic into the soil, brew complex potions, and erect massive stone walls just to sharpen their precision to a razor's edge. If these guys can just level up a tiny bit more, he'll finally be able to dump his morning chores right onto their laps. Jimmy McDaniel, a C-rank alchemist, walks up to Crow, still completely shell-shocked that they're actually breeding magical beasts, while Crow realizes this guy is easily the most gifted talent they've got besides Marika. He was one of the elite few who could actually live off alchemy alone, and aside from Marika, Jimmy was the only one who didn't need a soul-crushing side hustle to survive. Crow smirks, letting him know that a few healing herbs are all it takes to get those Labirds to chill out. Marika jumps in next, asking Kintaki if she can help feed the little guys too. After he gives her the green light, she walks right up to the birds with a handful of herbs, instantly noticing they're way sharper than your average wild bird. And with a grin, she realizes it's all thanks to Crow's legendary healing plants working their magic. Crow heard her take and realized smart was a massive understatement for what was really happening. See, the Lalleberg wasn't just being lazy. Those herbs were keeping it in a total drug-induced stupor. From there, Crow marched the crew toward the water reservoir, making sure to stop at the River Lizardman village to pay their respects along the way. The moment they reach the reservoir, Crow drops a bombshell. This entire massive lake was actually forged through alchemy. One alchemist was absolutely floored that a single person built this massive reservoir, while another claimed it looked more like someone rerouted an entire river. But Crow just played it cool, saying that while it's a brutal solo grind, anything is possible with a little teamwork. Jimmy couldn't help but wonder, why the heck was Nest Village playing nice with a bunch of lizard men? Crow just smirked, explaining it's a simple trade, their homegrown greens for the lizardmen's fresh-caught fish. Then, he pointed toward the horizon where the lizardman village was finally popping into view. But the second they pulled up, they realized the whole vibe was totally wrong. Jimmy scanned the area, only to realize the entire place had gone completely ghost town. Crow's mind started racing, desperately trying to piece together what the hell went down. But then, out of the shadows, they started emerging one by one. Suddenly the water erupts as a horde of lizardmen starts swarming out of the pond. Jimmy points them out, asking Crow if those are river lizard men. And while Crow confirms it, he's totally weirded out by why they're all huddled in the pond, especially since they're frantically signaling like they're absolutely terrified of something. Jimmy hesitated, wondering if they were actually being told to tuck tail and run, when suddenly, a voice from the crowd screamed out for Crow. He points toward the huts where something is definitely lurking. And the second those monsters crawl out, Crow barks at everyone to dive behind the trees. Suddenly, a pack of D-rank goblins lunges straight out of their hiding spots. Crow surveyed the ruins and realized the grim truth. A goblin horde had just torn this place apart. Jimmy's panicking, asking if he should book it back to Nest Village to bring in the cavalry. But Crow just stretches his arm out and shuts him down with a cold shake of his head. He's making it clear. He doesn't need a team to handle this light work. Marika's still on edge, though, terrified of what happens if his confidence backfires. Crow reassured Marika in his head that alchemy was built for battle, slamming his palm down as a surge of magical sparks tore through the earth. The ground starts bulging upward, and the second a goblin spots the movement, he begins channeling a lethal earth needle. Jagged stone pillars exploded right out of the earth. He skewers those goblins, dropping them before they even know what hit him. Crow's eyes locked onto a lone survivor who'd somehow dodged the spikes, and this time around, he thrusts his hands forward, instantly forging a devastating air cannon through the power of alchemy. With one sudden razor-sharp snap, a massive shockwave of compressed air surges forward, catching that fleeing goblin right in the face. The sheer force of that pressure just rips its body to shreds. The alchemist's jaw hit the floor as he watched that goblin get absolutely folded in the blink of an eye. Crow turned back and explained that by wielding alchemy like this, he could unleash an endless variety of devastating attacks. Chikaka sprints over, hyping Crow up as an absolute beast of a wizard and swearing he's forever in his debt. Crow brushed it off, immediately checking if anyone was injured, while Mariko stood there completely stunned by the lizard man's heavy accent. Chichikaka gave Crow the thumbs up, letting him know they were all safe and sound. He'd picked up the goblin's scent early and commanded everyone to dive for cover immediately. Crow felt a wave of second-hand embarrassment as 50 Kipak tribespeople crawled out of the brush, all because they were terrified of just 2 goblins. That's when Chichikaka spotted the alchemists and realized these had to be the new villagers. Crow backs it up, confirming that these guys are alchemists just like him. Marika piped up, admitting she's an alchemist as well, but she knows her skills are a joke compared to Crow's. And Chichikaka doubled down, swearing there isn't another mage alive who can even stand in his shadow. Crow flashed a sheepish grin, wondering if Chichikaka could finally relax, but the lizard man snapped back in total frustration that the nightmare was far from over. And as Crow pressed him to find out what else was going wrong, Chichikaka drops a bombshell. Those goblins are actually just low-level lackeys serving the swamp lizard man. This revelation catches Crow completely off guard, leaving him totally baffled by the connection. The lizard man warns him that these aren't your average goblins. They're bloodthirsty savages who live for violence. After kicking the lizard men out of their own home, these goblins have locked onto their next target and won't stop the assault until this entire place is theirs. Marika was absolutely horrified by the sight, while Crow turned to Chichikaka and demanded to know exactly where his old village was located. Chichikaka points them upstream, revealing that their goal lies just beyond the reach of the deadly demon forest. If those goblins actually made it to the Kapaka tribe, then Nest Village is basically a sitting duck. Crow gave Chichikaka his word that he'd do whatever it takes to bring peace to their world, heading straight back to Nest Village to cook up a master plan. The lizard man flashed a toothy grin and told Crow to officially sign them up for the chaos. Back at Nest Village, Crow catches the All-Brothers fresh from the demon forest, breaks down the chaos, and recruits them for the mission. They were all in, so Yorudo and Narasetsu wasted no time gearing up to head out on a high-stakes recon mission. They let their entire haul of scavenged bones come crashing down onto the dirt. Kairasuke gestured to the massive pile, asking if it was finally enough, and Crow gave a quick nod of thanks, confirming it would do the trick. These bones actually belonged to that monstrous black buffalo that went on a rampage through Nest Village. Since they're overflowing with raw magic, they'll fetch a massive price as high-grade fertilizer for the local crops. Whitehair asks what Crow's planning with those bones, and Crow explains that those aggressive swamp lizard men are basically gold mines for rare loot. He realized the only way they'd stand a chance was if he hooked the whole squad up with some lethal new gear. The second they heard that, the entire crowd swarmed Crow, practically begging him to forge them some god-tier weapons too. Crow's calling the shots on the rotation, and since he's kicking things off with Yorudo and Nelson, they need to haul it. This was Crow's first time ever forging weapons, and he was desperately praying for a masterpiece. As he pressed his palm against the earth, he started brainstorming the most badass design possible. Owl and Rose are total speed demons, so a massive heavy sword would usually just be a total anchor for them. But a flimsy weapon won't cut it, so he cranks up the bone's density to forge a blade that's razor thin but packs a massive punch. He mutters a quick incantation, forging the raw bone into deadly steel until he's finally holding two wicked blades. Rose, and I'm gonna have a total blast picking these apart. Isn't that right, Rose? He was shocked by how weightless the blades felt, and I noticed they were a perfect match for body enhancement magic. Yoruto pointed out that alchemy could forge some serious weapons, and Crow backed him up, explaining that as long as you've got the imagination, there's no limit to what you can create. He insisted that with enough practice and a spark of creativity, anyone could pull off the exact same feat. He immediately got to work, forging custom-made weapons for both Yorudo and Nelsis. The All-Brothers were absolutely losing it with excitement the moment they finally held their new gear. Crow wasted no time, demanding the full scoop on what they'd uncovered during their scout mission. He breaks it down. The enemy village is built right in the heart of a massive swamp, meaning the entire place is nothing but a giant, muddy mess. 50 armed-to-the-teeth goblins were holding down the fort alongside 30 red swamp lizardmen, and judging by the way they were barking orders, those goblins were definitely the ones running the show. Crow's eyes widened as he realized he'd massively underestimated the size of the enemy force. If this goblin army swarmed Nest Village, it was going to be a total disaster. Karasuke suggested a long shot. If these things could actually talk, maybe they could negotiate a truce. Crow was all for it, praying they could settle this peacefully instead of starting a war. Karasuke took a second to think it over, then looked Crow dead in the eye and dropped a wild proposal on him. After a quick secretive huddle, Crow finally gave the nod. Karasuke made sure to show him some serious gratitude. But deep down, Crow was already cooking up a wild new move he was dying to unleash. He tightened his fist and declared to the squad that the mission goes down tomorrow. We're dropping right into the Lizardman settlement along the banks of the old river. Word spread like wildfire to the lizard men that the goblins had just hit the jackpot with a top-tier water source. The guy getting the scoop was none other than the big boss himself, Chief Bar Joe of the Duffin tribe. Another lizard man rushed in to drop the bombshell that the Kipok tribe had already been wiped out, and with a goblin messenger back to confirm the defeat, Barjeo could only rub his head in pure frustration. He scoffed at how pathetic these lizardmen were, unable to wrap his head around how a measly 4 goblins managed to dominate them. It was like they weren't even the same species. The other lizard man jumps in, claiming there's a massive city just ahead, but those towering walls kept them completely shut out. The sheer scale of the place was insane, looking like a fortress built for war. Barjo hunkered down, waiting for the perfect window to strike the second those gates swung open. But right as he was getting ready, a voice called out and nearly jumped him out of his skin, shouting to the world that the humans had finally arrived. But the second they locked eyes with the Crows group, Barjo stepped up and barked at the strangers, demanding they tell him exactly who the hell they were. "I'll just tell them they're from a village down south where the local goblins have been raising absolute hell." He had to make sure those goblins stayed far away from his village and stopped terrorizing the Kapak tribe. But Barjo just smirked, asking what would go down if he decided to refuse. Iwil's answer was dead simple. He was going to wipe every last one of them off the face of the earth. Barjoskov just sneered, telling him he clearly didn't know his place, and that he honestly couldn't care less. Did Al seriously think he was going to walk out of there without a scratch? It was clear as day. The negotiations had officially gone up in smoke. Barjo screamed that they were cooked, and the goblins came sprinting at Crow's squad, cackling like lunatics as they closed in. I'm juicing up his blade with some serious power, and right as the first goblin lunges in, with a lightning-fast strike, he cleaves the beast in half, but he can't even catch his breath before the rest of the pack starts swarming him. He leaps back and unleashes a massive sweeping slash, tearing right through them. Barjo was caught completely off guard. Rose stayed low and exploded forward with insane speed. She's absolutely shredding every goblin in her path when she suddenly spots one lunging right at her from above. He rockets even higher into the sky and absolutely obliterates its head. She yanked her blade back and drove it home, sending that goblin slamming into the dirt. Witnessing their insane skills, Barjo could only mutter about how freaking strong they actually were. Rose and Al stood side by side, locked in and ready for the next round. They seal the deal with a legendary fist bump. Gerudo's carving through them with his dagger, but the second someone tries to play it safe at a distance, he's picking them off with a hail of arrows. Jimmy lets loose, raining down a storm of magical destruction on those unsuspecting goblins. Finally, the goblin horde breaks rank and scrambles away in a total panic. Barjo screams at the cowards, demanding to know where the hell they think they're going. But the second he spins around, his entire body locks up in pure terror. High up on the ramparts, the archers draw back their bows, locking their sights right onto the oncoming goblin horde. Crow stood tall on the ramparts, a cocky grin plastered across his face. Barjo was absolutely floored when he realized the entire village had been completely encircled by massive walls. There was no doubt about it. A total psycho of a mage had officially crashed the party. The goblins didn't waste a second, immediately scrambling to get the hell out of there. Gerudo barked out the order to drop the defense and unleash everything, and then the archers let loose, raining a deadly hail of arrows right into the goblin ranks. A lethal storm of arrows blotted out the sky, shredding them where they stood. Barjo spits out a curse as he watches the nightmare unfold, realizing he's completely hemmed in with absolutely zero ways to escape. Suddenly, a thunderous rhythm of footsteps erupts as Al barrels full speed straight for Barjo. Their blades slam together, sending a piercing ring of steel echoing through the air. I'll start talking trash, asking if he's even had a single second to look around, and he barked at him to keep his head in the game, and the second their powers slammed together, a massive explosion rocked the entire area. From high atop the wall, Crow kept a sharp eye on the carnage, needing Owl to stay laser-focused on backing up their forces. Owl had already let Crow in on the secret. He'd been pushing Rose and the demon forest to their absolute limits this entire time, and while it was finally time to head back to Bird's Garden, he wasn't leaving until he used this chaotic battle as the ultimate final test for Rose. But before stepping back into that night school, he was dying to see exactly how much his skills had leveled up. Those words hit Crow right in the feels, and with a sharp grin, he was officially all in on the plan. Crow realized his Earth Needle was a total bust in this swamp, so he decided it was finally time to unleash that secret magic he'd been cooking up. Gerudo screams for his team to keep the pressure on, and just as the archers pivot their fire toward the lizard men, these lizard warriors are absolute beasts, snatching arrows right out of the air with insane reflexes. Barjo snarled that those goblins were total trash, forcing the lizard men to step up and lead the charge. The lizard men unsheath their steel and charge, but Gerudo narrowly dodges a lethal axe swing, and then he signaled for another lethal wave, and this time, the arrows finally found their mark. Jimmy has no idea a lizard man is creeping up right behind him, but just as the monster lunges for the kill, he calmly whispers, "Sure met." He slams his hand down and chants, erupting a forest of jagged ice spikes that sends the lizard man reeling as the entire swamp freezes over in a heartbeat. Their feet snap-freeze to the ground, forcing out a pained grunt as the frost bites deep, leaving them paralyzed and desperate to know what just hit them. Perched on the wall, Crow realized the soaked ground was a total disaster for earth magic, but that just meant a different kind of power was about to take center stage. It looked like Owl and Rose didn't even need his help after all, because even with the battlefield turning into a swampy death trap, they didn't slow down their assault for a single second. Chief Bargeo absolutely lost it, letting out a thunderous roar of pure rage at those damn brats. I'm diving back into the life-or-death struggle against Chief Bargeo, while Rose goes on a total rampage, tearing through every other lizardman in her path. Chief Bargeo and Owl lunged forward, their weapons colliding with a deafening ring of steel. But I managed to knock the chief's weapon clean out of his hands, sending that axe spiraling through the air until it thuds right into the dirt. Bargeo spat out a curse and whipped his head around, only to see that his entire goblin army had been completely annihilated. With the rest of his lizard squad lying broken in the dirt, a cold blade bites into his throat before he can even blink, as I ask if he's still delusional enough to think he's coming out on top. Bargeo looked Al dead in the eye and finally admitted they'd been crushed. Crow and the squad vaulted straight off the wall, closing the distance in a heartbeat. Crow marched right up to Bargeo, demanding to know if he was the big boss of this clan and what he called himself. Bargeo drops his name while sizing up the kid in disbelief, wondering if this brat is actually the boss, before turning to Crow to ask what they should do with the leftover lizardmen. Out of nowhere, Bargeo starts groveling for their lives, swearing they'll never even think about messing with Crow ever again. He surrendered every last blade and scrap of armor, swearing to leave it all behind to rot in this land forever. Crow froze in his tracks, caught in a rare moment of pure doubt. Up until now, he'd been ruthlessly shredding every demon in his path, knowing full well you can't talk sense into a mindless monster. But catch this. These lizardmen weren't just mindless beasts. They were actually smart enough to sit down and strike a deal. Maybe he was just being a dreamer, but he held out hope they could actually change. Now, the only question left was exactly how hard he should crush them. Crow laid down the law. If the lizardmen wanted to keep their heads, they'd have to trek deep into the frozen north and kiss their days of ruling over goblins goodbye. If they dare break that promise, he's gonna make sure they watch their whole world get wiped off the map. Bargeo spat a bitter curse about the sting of being in someone's debt, but he ultimately yielded to Crow's call and slammed his blade back into its scabbard. Bargeo barks at his warriors to drop their steel right then and there. He announces that from this day on, the Dolphin tribe is officially a clan of one-armed warriors. Crow hoists his blade and, with brutal precision, he starts taking the left arms off every single lizard man one by one. Once the job was done, Al confirmed they'd salvaged every last weapon from the battlefield. With their village reduced to a smoldering pile of ash, the lizard men were left with absolutely nowhere to call home. Crow was drowning in doubt over his next move until Rose pulled him into a back hug, instantly clocking the dark look written all over his face. She looked him dead in the eye and swore that if those lizard freaks ever dared to show their faces again, she'd personally wipe them off the map. Crow apologizes for smelling like a literal crime scene, making Rose turn bright red as she insists he go wash up immediately. But he just starts laughing, and when she asks what's so funny, he just shook his head. They slammed their hands together in a final pact, and Rose declared she was heading straight back to Nest Village. After a tense silence, Crow finally gave his nod, fully realizing that the demon forest wasn't the only place hiding a nightmare. They had to turn Nest Village into a total fortress, and they needed to do it right now, all just to make sure everyone makes it out of this alive. A few days have already flown by since the dust settled from that brutal clash with the lizard men. The big day finally hit, and Alani Isma was ready to set off on his epic journey. Sebastian didn't hold back, thanking Alani Isma for every single thing he'd done up to this point. Crow flashed a grin, hyping him up for the Night Academy, and as Owl gripped that custom-made blade, he vowed to give it his absolute all, leaving Crow thinking what a genuinely good kid he was. He put Rose in charge of the village's safety while he was away, and she stepped up with total confidence, swearing to crush any demon that dared to show its face. Right then, Lavi shows up, so I give him a quick pat and tell him Crow's safety is now in his hands. Sebastian warned him to watch his back, and Owl swore he'd be back the second he caught a breather. He shouted one last boisterous goodbye as the wagons finally rolled out. The rest of the group watched him fade into the distance, while Stuart quietly noted that Crow-sama was also gearing up to leave. Crow just flashed a confident smirk, putting Al's safety in Stuart's hands and making sure to put in a massive order for Philosopher's Stones for the next time they crossed paths. Stuart promised to crank those numbers up even higher, while elsewhere, a man bows before the alchemist, apologizing as he begs him to haul a fresh harvest to the plaza. Jimmy didn't hesitate for a second. He was officially all in on the mission. With the Lizermen disaster fresh in his mind, Crow realized their defenses were a joke, so he tapped into the power of Stuart's Philosopher's Stone to forge a squad of massive golems. He rallied a squad of alchemists to lock down the Kipok clan's reservoir, keeping eyes on the place 24/7. He noticed that even the local villagers were finally stepping up to lend a hand. These golems weren't just built for war. They were absolute units at manual labor, making everyone hyped for a way better life. Crowell was pumped to see what kind of massive progress they'd pull off next. Once the wagons rolled out, Crow turned his attention back to beefing up Nest Village, dead set on turning his golems into the ultimate defense force. Determined to see it through, he decided that today was the day they'd dive headfirst into brutal combat training deep inside the demon forest. He pushed his worries aside and gave the signal, knowing the alchemist had to get used to the heat of battle, while a nervous Jimmy stepped up, ready to give it everything he had. Hayabusa's shooter tagged along to watch their backs, but the heat turns up when you're suddenly summoned by Lord Crow himself. Right as a wildfang burst onto the scene, Crow whipped around to ask Jimmy if he was ready. And even though he was rattled, Jimmy fired back a yes. The wildfawn lunges forward, sticking the landing right on top of the golem's massive head. Jimmy stood there paralyzed until Crow's roar shattered his trance, forcing him to lock back in. Jimmy barks an order, and his goal lunges forward, snatching the monster and throwing it across the battlefield like a rag doll. The wildfang scrambled back to its feet for another round, but the golem beat him to the punch and launched a massive counterattack. He drives a massive fist straight into the beast, slamming it into the dirt with bone-shaking force. The crowd's jaws hit the floor as they witnessed the impossible happen right before their eyes. They were absolutely floored that the golem had the raw power to crush a monster of that scale. Another alchemist commands his golem to slam a fist right into a wild fang's stomach, ending the beast in a single effortless strike. Meanwhile, Marika flexes her insane control, commanding her golem to delete 2 monsters in a single heartbeat. As the alchemists tallied up their mountain of kills, Jimmy stood there stunned by the golem's sheer destructive force, proving to everyone that these metal titans were the real deal on the battlefield. Crow watched from the shadows, totally floored as Marika single-handedly shredded 15 wild fangs, proving that a golem's power is a direct reflection of its master's skill. But with a new mission calling his name, he ordered them to keep the grind going by training with the Hate-No Archer. Seeing Marika breeze through her work without breaking a sweat, he asked if she'd join him on the upcoming Nest Village survey, and she beamed with a total yes. As the day wound down, Marika was still in total shock, whispering to herself that this whole thing felt like a straight-up dream. Imagine the sheer adrenaline of hitching a ride on a titan that massive. Between bites of food, Rose asks about the mission, and Crow lays out the plan. They're hitting the Lizard Man swamp first, with Marika adding that they'll be pushing north right after. Rose asked if those swamp lizard men were really a threat since they'd let them pass before, but Crow shut that down, warning her that you can never trust a monster to keep its word or forget a grudge. Running into them again would be a total disaster since that massive golem is pure nightmare fuel. But as Rose softly breathed his name, Marika suddenly gasped. She'd just spotted a hidden lizard man settlement deep in the swamp. Crow gave the green light, and they immediately hit the ground on foot to investigate. They creep forward on high alert, eyes darting through the shadows for any sign of an ambush. Levi stuck to them like glue as they dove deeper into the mystery, after scouring every single inch for hours on end. But those scaly lizard men had completely vanished from the swamp, leaving the crew with no choice but to pack it up and head home. Crow figured that if there were 0 tracks this far north, maybe the Lizermen had finally given up on their grudge. But right as that thought crossed his mind, he spotted something seriously off. He screamed at the top of his lungs that someone was being swarmed by a horde of nasty goblins. One dwarf steps up and absolutely clobbers a goblin. He rips right through its gut, sending the beast crashing to the ground. Blood sprays across the dirt, and Rose nearly chokes when she realizes they're actually dwarves. What on earth are they even doing in a place like this? Grunting under his breath, one dwarf couldn't believe just how many monsters were swarming the frontier. Right then, another dwarf let out a shout, completely blown away by the size of that massive golem. But Marika just stood there, whispering under her breath like she'd seen this thing before. Croat spun toward her, totally caught off guard, and demanded to know if she actually recognized them. Marika reveals that back in the capital, these dwarf brothers were the ones crafting glass bottles for her potion supplier, and one of them charges over in a total frenzy, absolutely stunned to run into her here. He dropped the news that they were planning to pack up and follow her straight to Nest Village, while the other dwarf couldn't help but wonder who the heck her new crew was. Marika steps up to handle the introductions, presenting Crow as the Lord of Nest Village, and Roses as a highborn lady from the rambling Viscount family. The dwarf's eyes are glued to Crow, absolutely reeling that someone this young could actually be the Lord, while Marika starts ripping into the brothers for being so incredibly disrespectful. He proudly declared that the Crow was the god who revolutionized alchemy and the mastermind behind that colossal golem. The dwarves are losing their minds, whispering in absolute shock. One of them shouts that building a titan this massive is proof of god-tier alchemy. He immediately swallows his pride, apologizing for ever doubting Crow just because of his looks. He introduces himself as Norther, a 200-year-old dwarf and absolute master craftsman who can forge anything from simple glass bottles to high-tier weaponry. But here's the catch. This guy is a massive booze hound who literally can't function without a drink in his hand. He also mentions that he and his brother Verto are thick as thieves and get along perfectly. Verto steps forward to introduce himself, and the brothers ask if they can finally set up shop in Nest Village. The chief demands to know exactly who Verto is and what he brings to the table. Verto is a 200-year-old dwarven powerhouse known for his legendary craftsmanship. He's the master finisher who takes everything Nord builds and turns it into a masterpiece. Unlike his brother, Verto skips the light stuff and goes straight for the high-proof moonshine that hits like a truck. But lately, the guy starts getting seriously restless if he goes too long without a stiff drink. At the end of the day, he and Nord are brothers who share an unbreakable bond. Crow winced at the pathetic appraisal results while the stench of booze hit him like a truck. But he knew that if they wanted to stop bleeding gold, they had to ditch the Bird's Garden imports and start making their own glass locally. Crow played it cool, asking if their non-stop boozing had ever actually caused trouble for the locals. The dwarves instantly panicked, gasping in total shock that he'd even call them out like that. Seeing them squirm, Crow knew right then and there that his suspicions were dead on. Marika leaned in close, whispering for him to relax because she personally guaranteed these guys were absolute beasts. She reminded him that these guys were actually master blacksmiths themselves. If they just stayed on the outskirts away from the main village, they wouldn't be a headache for anyone. Crow smirked, pointing out that she seemed to know an awful lot about them. He realizes that between the deafening clangs of the forge and the inevitable drunken chaos, his best bet is to shove them off into a secluded corner where they won't bother a soul. Crow finally makes his call. He's letting them stay, figuring it'd be a total waste to kick them out after they've traveled all this way. Nord exhales a massive sigh of relief and offers his thanks, while Verto notes that their love for the bottle almost got them kicked back to the capital, leaving him puzzled about how the Lord even knew they were such big drinkers. Rose didn't pull any punches, snapping that they reeked of it so badly that literally anyone could tell. Virdo let out a nervous chuckle, realizing she'd completely read him like an open book. Nord suddenly locks eyes with Ravi and straight up asks if he's looking at some kind of monster. Croak introduces the little guy as Ravi, explaining that they're raising him right there in Nest Village, while Nor nods along and gives Ravi a friendly pat, as he whispered under his breath about how freaking adorable it was. Ravi flinches the second she pulls him into a hug, but she just squeezes tighter and refuses to let go. Nord starts panicking as he realizes Ravi has gone completely limp in his arms. Crow bolts over in a total panic, desperately shouting Ravi's name. But then, it finally clicks, and he realizes exactly what's wrong. Turns out, Ravi was just completely knocked out because Verdo and Nord reeked like a literal brewery. Rose's face goes stone cold as a terrifying aura starts radiating from her, making Crow's voice shake as he desperately calls out her name. Rose is absolutely livid, banning the dwarves from ever setting foot near Ravi again, which sends the brothers scrambling behind Marika for cover, while Crow realizes that keeping these guys far away from the village was definitely the right call. Autumn has officially hit Nest Village, and it's bringing a massive wave of 300 immigrants along with it. The irresistible aroma of charred fish hit them hard, accompanied by the aggressive, satisfying sizzle of the grill. Seabass bragged that the move went off without a hitch, and the welcome party was a total blast. And even though Crow sounded completely wiped, he had to agree. Seabass notices he's looking totally wiped out, and Crow admits it's because he just burned through 300 appraisals in a single sitting. And get this, in a single day he expanded the entire village and built 4 massive housing zones to fit 400 people, leaving even Seabass stunned by how much energy that must have drained out of him. Crow 8 was honestly stunned. Even with the sweet perks he offered, he never imagined 300 people would actually settle down in the middle of nowhere. Seabass pointed out that life outside was a brutal struggle, making a guaranteed winter survival impossible to pass up. But then, a voice from the crowd suddenly screamed for a Crota dance. Chichikaka piped up, sounding hyped that they were finally being let in on the action. Crow flashed a grateful grin, knowing the Kipok tribe always had their backs, and as Chichikaka emotionally declared how amazing it felt to finally be treated like equals, Crow realized just how much suffering they'd endured to get here. The crowd's roar reached a fever pitch, and Crow, sensing something big was going down, dove straight into the chaos to see for himself. He spotted Nord and Verdo completely hammered, with poor Marika frantically trying to keep the two of them under control. The moment she spots Crow, she starts frantically apologizing, swearing she only looked away for a split second before those two got totally hammered. But Crow just brushes it off and marches right up to the dwarves. Verdot screams at the top of his lungs that the Lord is finally here, while Nord smirks, noting the guy arrived just in the nick of time. Verto finally delivered the custom-built gear Crow requested, making Nor wonder what kind of legendary drinking snack Crow was about to whip up with it. Crow beams with a massive grin, thanks the crew, and vows to whip it up right this second. Back in the kitchen, Rose is grumbling under her breath, totally salty that she's being forced to do the dirty work too. Crow promised her the very first taste if she helped him out, but Rose was completely distracted by a bizarre-looking blade she'd never seen in her entire life. Crow breaks it down, pointing out the peeler and the slicer sitting right next to it. Rose leaned in with wide eyes, asking the dwarf brothers if they were the ones who forged these items and how they actually worked. Crow steps up to show her how it's done, whipping out a peeler and shredding through those potatoes at lightning speed. Rose is left speechless, whispering in total awe at how effortlessly he handles the whole process. Crow shows her the ropes with the slicer, and Marika is absolutely floored by how it tears through potatoes with perfect precision, making her old knife look like a total joke. Rose watched the prep like a hawk, asking if cranking that Kuropod oil to the perfect temp would do the trick, and Profanctor gave her the green light. They take those freshly soaked potato slices and plunge them straight into the sizzling hot oil, the oil's screaming as those potatoes fry, and that's when Crow finally calls it. The time has come. He yanked the chips out, hit them with a heavy dusting of salt, and let them rest for a second to get that perfect crunch. He shouted out the big reveal. The potato chips were finally perfected. Marika stared down at those golden, fresh out of the fryer chips and couldn't help but scream about how amazing they smelled. Crow flashed a grin and told the whole squad to quit waiting and start feasting. Rose leaned in close, whispering to herself as she wondered if the flavor actually lived up to the hype. Without wasting a single second, Beige snatched one up and went for the crunch. And just like that, massive triumphant grins broke out across their faces. Rose was absolutely floored that simple fried potatoes could taste this legendary. But her peace was shattered when someone suddenly roared out, demanding a bite. Nord took one bite and absolutely lost it, shouting at the top of his lungs about how incredible it tasted. Virdo chimed in, insisting it's the ultimate snack to wash down with a cold cup of sake. One guy shouted at the top of his lungs that Kuro-sama had just whipped up another absolute masterpiece. The kids came sprinting over, shouting Kuro-sama's name and dying to get a taste for themselves. Crost flashed a warm smile as he shared his stash. And just like that, the entire village exploded into a massive, joyful celebration. Pro groaned, muttering that he was officially running on fumes. But the line of hungry villagers just kept stretching further and further back. Luckily, Sebastian jumped in to help him hold the line before things spiraled into total chaos. Verdo steps up right then, announcing he's finally delivered the prototypes Crow was dying to see. You shove a detox potion down his throat to snap him out of it, and Nord immediately starts grilling you about how the prototypes performed. Crow gives them props for the effort, but drops a major reality check. To mass-produce these, they need to ditch the iron for cheap wood and slash that insane 50,000 gil price tag down to a measly 500. They didn't need these things to be indestructible. But Virtua was absolutely floored, questioning if it was really okay for their gear to just shatter like glass. Crow argued that as long as they didn't snap instantly, making them dirt cheap and easy to replace every year was actually a genius move. Verdo pushed back, insisting that if they were putting in the work, they should just make them indestructible, even if it meant a higher price tag. Nor stepped in and demanded to know why Crow was so obsessed with cutting corners and keeping everything on a budget. Crow laid out his grand vision. He wanted potato chips to be a snack for the masses, aiming to flood the royal capital and rake in a mountain of gold. For this to actually work, the gear had to be dirt cheap, so he asked for their take. Nord went dead silent in thought, while Verdo admitted he absolutely hated making low-budget junk. But after seeing the pure joy on the villagers' faces as they devoured those chips, Verto finally threw in the towel. For a legendary craftsman, there's no bigger high than seeing their work bring pure joy to the masses. Verdo announced it was time for another round of drinks, while Nordy hollered at Crow to get hyped for his next insane upgrades. Meanwhile, Crow's mind was already racing with ways to push his peeler and slicer to the absolute limit. To get those chips flying off the shelves, he decided to go all out and unleash a massive variety of wild new flavors. He figured boiling down Ralbert bones could create a killer consommé, But since they were totally at the mercy of the trade guild for salt and pepper, he decided it was high time they started growing their own spices. He tasked Stuart with tracking down multiple kinds of spy seeds, and Seabass was all over it, promising to get a letter sent out immediately. Crow stood back and watched as the villagers finally got to kick back and feast like there was no tomorrow. A smirk tugs at his lips as the archer squad cruises through the bustling town, soaking in the electric vibes of the city. The lizard men are vibing perfectly with the crowd, all while Rose and Marika are back in the kitchen, frantically frying up a fresh mountain of potato chips. With his population absolutely exploding, Crow realized it was finally time to branch out and dive into some massive new ventures. He made the call. Tomorrow, they're heading straight for Ragno Village, a town legendary for its top-tier dairy farms. Deep in the heart of Ragno Village, the cattle are just chilling in the fields, grazing away without a single care in the world. That steady rhythm of them munching on grass just blankets the whole area in a total sense of calm. A swarm of local kids rushes over to see the commotion. They're absolutely starstruck, watching with wide eyes as the golem finally starts to move. That's when a mysterious man steps out of the shadows and approaches Crow. He steps up and introduces himself as Dimitri, the guy running the whole village. Right then, an appraisal window flashes on screen, revealing every detail about him. Meet Dimitri, the 46-year-old chief of Regno Village who's absolutely obsessed with his sheep and goats. His artisan cheese and butter are so legendary that every village nearby is dying to get a taste. The man is a total master when it comes to taming and training herbivores. But once he starts his dairy work, he gets so hyper-focused that he completely forgets the world exists. Crow explained that he used to be a total regular for Tree's dairy products back in the day. So he swung by to pay his respects and drop off a little peace offering to show he's a friend. But the gift turned out to be a high-tier B-rank potion packed in with a bunch of fresh veggies. Dimitri's jaw hit the floor when he realized just how much this thing was actually worth. Crory just flashed a confident smirk, explaining that Nest Village was practically overflowing with treasures just like it. Since they had so many, he told Dimitri to just take it as a total gift. Dimitri stood there in total shock, admitting he'd heard the whispers about Nest Village blowing up, but he never actually believed them until now. And Wagner, beaming with pride, made sure he knew it was all thanks to Crow. Dimitri breathed a sigh of relief, explaining that this gift was a total godsend since a brutal goblin raid had just left the village in shambles and the people wounded, his voice heavy with exhaustion but burning with pure determination as he gave a gentle pat to a sheep, admitting that every single hardship he endured was worth it just to keep his people safe. He breaks into a warm, genuine grin, but Crow's face instantly clouds over as he starts overthinking the situation. He realized Ragno Village was a nomadic target with zero walls to protect them, leaving everyone shivering in flimsy tents and paralyzed by non-stop anxiety. Then, out of nowhere, a stroke of genius hit him like a lightning bolt. He proposed a massive move for the Ragnos people, urging them to head for Nest Village where safety, a feast of food and sacred rituals were finally within their reach. This deal would have flooded them with dairy and made it a total win-win, but Dimitri didn't even hesitate before shutting the whole thing down. He explains that their entire survival hinges on their livestock, forcing them to constantly chase fresh grass and making the idea of settling down a total pipe dream. He launched his attack but got immediately shut down by a savage counter. Think about it. If they could actually guarantee an endless supply of grass, the whole headache of constantly moving would just vanish. The whole village goes dead quiet. Every single eye locked right onto him. The haunting bellows of the cattle ripped through the silence, filling the air with a heavy, suffocating weight. The crowd erupted into nervous whispers, everyone dying to know what Cronelt, the Lord of Nest Village, was really cooking up with his alchemy. Tapping into his core with a silent roar in his soul, he commanded an endless sea of grass to surge into existence. Before they could even blink, the dirt beneath their feet surged to life, transforming into a sea of vibrant green. Gasps of pure shock filled the air as Dimitri shouted in disbelief, witnessing a literal miracle. Alchemy that could actually bring dead grass back to life. The villagers were shocked to see the sheep devouring the feed like absolute beasts, prompting Crow to shout to the dormitory that their food crisis was finally history. Pretty crazy, right? As the villagers begged for a decision, Dimitri took a heavy moment to think before turning a cold, determined stare right toward Crow. He accepts the deal, putting his full faith in his people to guard the village while he's away. Completely overwhelmed, he hits his knees and starts sobbing, pouring his entire soul into a heartfelt thank you. Crow flashed a massive, beaming smile, a total promise that they were finally on the same page. The villagers beam right back at him, proving their hearts are as pure and innocent as can be. Crow and Wagner locked eyes, both of them silently feeling the massive weight of the situation. Fast forward 2 days, And there's Dimitri, standing tall right alongside his people from Regno village. They stared wide-eyed at the strange new world, whispering the realization that this was finally their home. Crow gave them a massive welcome to Nest Village and wasted no time jumping straight into the grand tour. Since their livestock would go absolutely ballistic if a monster even breathed nearby, the Ragno villagers were forced to settle on the complete opposite side of the cursed forest. He showed off their brand new home, and the kids went absolutely wild the second they saw their rooms. They dove headfirst onto the beds, absolutely losing it over how insanely soft and cozy they felt. Crow leads them straight to the new barn, explaining that he built a massive earth wall to keep the noise and animal stench from ever reaching their living quarters. The villagers were absolutely floored by how solid and massive these pens were, giving their animals a total 5-star upgrade. Crow finally leads the group to the farmland, and the scale of the place is just insane. The kids absolutely lose it, screaming in pure awe at the sight of those endless fields. Metri flashed a massive grin, muttering to himself that they were making themselves right at home. Crow marveled at how the alchemist helped them stockpile a mountain of gear in just 2 days. But right as he was counting his blessings, Rose pops back in with Ravi in tow, letting out a heavy sigh as she explains that the little guy went absolutely wild the second he caught a whiff of those animals. In a flash, Ravi wrenches himself free and slips right through their fingers. He bolted away, and as Rose let out a panicked cry, Dimitri stood there frozen in absolute shock, realizing the beast was actually a silver wildfang. He started to freak out thinking about such a monster lurking right under their noses. But Crow's cool, confident smile instantly put his mind at ease. Crow called Ravi back, and the second that little guy chirped a happy yes, he put him in charge of leading the sheep. Ravi lunges forward, sending the entire flock scattering in a total frenzy. They bolted as Ravi zoomed after them, practically vibrating with pure excitement. The villagers stood there with their jaws on the floor, absolutely floored by how brilliant this creature actually was. Crow chimed in, explaining that as long as Ravi was close by, they could totally try making requests just like that one. Crow asks if the Ragno villagers need anything else, so Dimitri admits that churning out dairy, especially cheese, is a total nightmare without a proper facility, especially if they're planning to go big with mass production. He realized he couldn't just wing it. He needed a full-blown, dedicated workshop to get the job done. He mapped out a 3-room layout, splitting the whole process into specialized zones to keep things running smooth. One station is dedicated to the intense heat treatment, while the other handles all the molding and draining. And he's got another one dedicated solely to molding its shape and letting it age to perfection. And since they're constantly shearing sheep, they're gonna need a dedicated workshop to spin all that wool into yarn. Crow didn't waste a heartbeat, immediately heading over to the dwarf brothers to get his gear dialed in. He then put Dimitri in charge of the village's horses, tasking him with breeding a massive herd and training them for the saddle, a challenge Dimitri accepted with total confidence. Crow realized that if he could just get those alchemists in the saddle, the village's defense would become lightning fast. With warm wool to survive the frost and a massive haul of dairy, their lives were finally hitting the jackpot. The village stats are officially blowing up. Nest Village just hit 400 people after merging with Regno, and they've kicked off a massive ranching operation with flocks of sheep, goats, and horses everywhere. Meanwhile, the scene cuts straight to the rambling Viscount's estate where things are heating up. He stared out the window, his mind clearly miles away. He started recapping everything they'd just hashed out. He had one mission for her: get to Nest Village, because that's where his daughter is staying. She was putting her entire life in her hands. The warrior maiden dropped to one knee, pledging her absolute loyalty to him right then and there. And right then, a subtle, knowing smirk finally tugged at the corners of his mouth. The entire village was absolutely buzzing with a brand new electric energy. Crow was living his best life with some cheesy pizza and thinking it was the ultimate start to his morning. But the peace is instantly shattered when Rose comes charging in, looking absolutely terrified. She shrieked that a total disaster had struck and Diana was already in the village. But before Rose could even finish her warning, a commanding voice cut through the air to announce her arrival. Diana steps forward, making it crystal clear that there's absolutely no point in running. Rose snaps back defensively, swearing she's not running away. She just wants to know what Diana is even doing there. Crow gently shouted Rose's name at the top of his lungs. Before another word could even be uttered, Diana's eyes locked onto her target and she lunged forward, leaving Rose completely paralyzed with shock. Diana pulled her into a massive hug, swearing right then and there that she's never letting her go. An appraisal window pops up, laying her stats bare for everyone to see. Meet Diana McClear, a 12-year-old attendant serving Rose of the prestigious Rambling family. She's a heavy-hitting power-type swordsman who doubles as Rose's personal shield. Diana absolutely worships the ground Rose walks on, and her absolute worst nightmare is losing her lady's favor. Rose barked at her to settle down, but Crow just flashed Diana a warm smile, thanking her for making it through that exhausting journey. Rose whipped around in total shock, realizing he'd seen her coming all along, and demanded to know why he'd kept her in the dark. Crow finally fesses up about that secret letter from Viscount Rambling, admitting he kept it under wraps just to keep her from spiraling. Diana broke it down for them. The second owl headed back to Bird's garden. She was deployed to step in and fill the void. She bowed low to thank Crow for his help, but then announced she was taking the reins from here on out, leaving Rose to let out a massive sigh as she realized her days of slacking off were officially dead and buried. Crows figured Rose's place was massive enough for both of them, so he pushed for Diana to move in. And while Rose wasn't exactly thrilled, he finally caved and told her she'd better follow his lead. Diana was practically glowing at the thought of finally living alone with Rose, while Crow was low-key stressing, convinced that two women under one roof was a total recipe for disaster. But he shook it off, realizing that having another absolute beast on his side was a total game-changer. Even though she just walked through the door, he wasn't about to give Diana a break. It was time to throw her straight into the deep end. Moments later, the trio plunges into the dense forest with a marksman stalking right behind them to cover their backs. Crow explains that they're constantly braving the cursed forest to hunt for food and stock up on essential supplies. Rose looked at their growing squad and asked exactly how deep they were planning to push into the unknown. Crow didn't hesitate, declaring that they were venturing way past the territory of the Black Buffalo. Diana scans the area, wondering what the heck a demon like that is even doing there, while Ravi, who was dying to join the party, is actually tucked away and totally zonked out. Crow was using a golem he'd swiped from Eris to lug Ravi around. Since the massive golem was way too clunky for a hunt, this smaller version was the perfect fit. But for a split second, his mind started to drift. He couldn't help but wonder, whatever happened to Marika's bear? Suddenly, they run smack into a massive, menacing herd of black buffalo. She signaled Crow to clear the path and hoisted the legendary buffalo sword, ready to bring the heat. They lunge straight into the fray, and right on cue, Diana steps in to shut that attack down. The impact hit with enough force to kick up a massive cloud of dust. And as the smoke cleared, that buffalo was still standing there, absolutely fuming, but before the beast could even blink, Diana unleashed her massive blade and cleaved it in half with one clean strike. Another buffalo barreled toward them, but her blade cut it down in the blink of an eye. Two more tried to jump her from behind, but Rose just flashed a lethal grin and blurred past them, slicing them both down in a heartbeat. Crow watched with a smirk of pure satisfaction, seeing their teamwork hit a level of absolute perfection as Rose held the line with rock-solid precision. They pushed even deeper into the dark, twisted heart of that cursed forest. Rose looked back, realizing they'd already covered an insane amount of ground. Crow points out they're caught right between the Devil's Forest and the Kyrgyz Mountains, and the ground is starting to get seriously steep. Rose was totally on edge and warned Diana to stay sharp, but Diana just locked in with a look of pure steel. Suddenly, a sharp sound shattered the eerie silence. Something was closing in fast, and the squad stopped dead in their tracks the second Rose shrieked a warning. A colossal elder grizzly stalks out of the shadows, looking like a literal mountain of fur and muscle. This rank B monster practically bleeds dominance, a lone wolf predator that'll tear apart anyone who dares to step into its territory. You freeze in total shock as the danger sinks in, while Crow's mind starts racing, realizing that a B-rank monster like this is as lethal as 100 black buffalo charging at once. Rose is ready to throw down, and Crow figures this is the perfect moment to see just how much power this monster is actually packing. He wasn't about to flinch. He was charging straight into the collision. The elder grizzly lets out a thunderous roar and hammers the golem with a massive blow, sending the stone giant stumbling back. The entire forest literally quaked as its pure, unadulterated rage ripped through the trees. Right then, Diana lunged forward with everything she had. She's absolutely hammering the beast with bone-shattering strikes, and smoke starts pouring out the second her blade carves deep into its neck. But the monster didn't even flinch, charging straight through. That massive mountain of muscle was barreling right for her. Diana let out a frustrated scream. Her last strike barely even scratched the surface. The massive grizzly rockets into the air, brandishing its lethal claws for a devastating strike. They slammed down with blinding, terrifying speed. She braced for impact, completely floored by its raw power and insane agility. Suddenly, the ground itself roared to life as jagged rock spires erupted from the earth. The strike pierced the beast mid-charge, slamming its massive body face-first into the dirt. Diana stood there paralyzed, her eyes wide with disbelief as she processed the impossible. This was earth magic, plain and simple. As the monster stumbled back, desperate voices screamed for Diana to fall back immediately. Without missing a beat, Eris launched himself like a rocket toward the elder grizzly. Sifa unleashes his magic, conjuring a massive fireball to blast right through anyone he deems worthy. Out of nowhere, A lethal bolt of fire rips through the air and hammers the monster, triggering a massive explosion that swallows it whole. The elder grizzly let out a bone-chilling roar, and Chrome couldn't help but be impressed that it actually dodged his magic. This B-rank beast was definitely the real deal. The Yeti flashed a wicked, bone-chilling grin. But right then, Rose materialized out of thin air behind the beast. The grizzly whipped its massive frame around to face her head-on. But before it could even strike back, her blade cut through the air in a blinding flash. He let out a perfect strike, clean slicing the beast's arm right off its body. The limb hit the dirt with a heavy thud, blood spraying everywhere as the monster let out a gut-wrenching scream. All that cockiness vanished in an instant, and you could see the pure panic starting to mess with its rhythm. Crow realized the monster was finally breaking. This was the opening they'd been waiting for. Realizing his massive needle spell would shred Rose in the front lines, he switches tactics and summons a hulking golem that towers over the battlefield and he lunges forward and buries a heavy strike right into the beast's gut, landing a hit that connects with massive force. But the beast doesn't even flinch, roaring back with a bone-crushing counter that sends the golem flying. Cracks spiderweb across the golem's face, but the beast just tanks the hit, anchoring its massive legs deep into the dirt. He winds up, lunges forward, and delivers a punch so brutal it literally shatters the grizzly's skull, sending its head spinning through the air. The golem slammed into the earth with a bone-shaking thud, as the monster's lifeless body came crashing down into the dirt. Crow let out a roar of pure victory because the legendary elder grizzly had finally bit the dust. Diana and Awestruck were dying to know the secret behind that little golem's massive power. As they wondered where he found such a beast, Crow coolly dropped the bomb that he'd forged it himself, using alchemy. Diana's jaw hit the floor in pure disbelief. This wasn't just your typical earth magic. We're talking about high-level alchemy. Then Rose just casually chimed in, revealing that those massive walls and the terrain from earlier were all alchemical masterpieces too. Crow's face twisted in pure embarrassment as the truth hit him. But suddenly, Ravi slipped right out of his grip. He's spinning in panicked circles until his legs finally give out, sending him crashing to the dirt. The nurses whispered that he was straight up claiming his territory. Rose couldn't help but wonder, was Ravi actually starting to love this place? Crow realized this beast had definitely marked its territory, but the timing felt suspicious. Just then, Herd shouted as something caught his eye. He points right to a jagged, ancient scar etched into the old grizzly's body. A nasty gash caught his eye, one that definitely didn't happen during their scrap. And Crow confirms the chilling truth. This wasn't their doing. He sized up the massive mark and realized it had to be the work of an elder grizzly, or something even more terrifying. A bone-chilling realization suddenly hit Lavigny Fong, and his eyes snapped wide in pure terror. What could possibly drive the Lavigny Fong, the undisputed king of the snowy peaks, to leave its throne and descend into the cursed forest? Looking at that raw, gaping wound in the grizzly's gut, it's clear he lost a brutal turf war. But man, even a ranked monster shouldn't have been folded this easily. Which raises a chilling question. Is there something even more nightmare-inducing lurking deep within the Kurger's mountains? That mystery would have to wait for another day. Crow barked out orders to butcher the elder grizzly immediately so they could haul the loot back for a massive village feast. Back at the village, the hype was through the roof as everyone scrambled to get a spot in line. Since that elder grizzly meat was way too tough for roasting, they hacked it into chunks and simmered it with veggies into a massive soul-warming stew. Crow flashed a huge grin as he passed out the bowls, telling the whole crew to dig in and enjoy the feast. Rose Blue gave the meal a respectful nod before finally diving in for a taste. Her eyes shot wide open as the realization hit her like a truck. She doesn't even hesitate, diving back in for more as her face lights up and her eyes start to sparkle with pure joy. The flavor is absolutely legendary, and the meat literally dissolves on her tongue like nothing she's ever tasted before. Diana was totally floored, losing her mind over how that sweet, fatty meat melted right into the broth and turned the richness up to 11. Crost grinned with pure satisfaction, knowing that with all this top-tier meat, turning it into a hot pot was a total genius move. Diana set her empty bowl down and got real, admitting that today's win was all thanks to Crow's mastery over alchemy, a power everyone used to trash talk as a total failure. Building something on this massive scale meant they'd officially outgrown their village roots and were leveling up into a straight-up town. She reminded him that the villagers' incredible energy and every single smile on their faces were all because of him. Crow's face turned beet red as he admitted her words were actually getting to him, but the moment was cut short when Diana suddenly called out his name. Her expression finally softened as she told him they were in this together, so he'd better treat her right from now on. Crow flashed a warm, genuine grin that lit up his entire face. Claster Hand is ready, and Diana, welcome to Nest Village. The next morning, Crow is completely dead to the world until Ravi starts nudging him, forcing his eyes to finally flutter open. Crow reached out to ruffle his hair, asking with a smirk if he was there to be his personal alarm clock before wishing him a bright good morning. Crow mumbles about how cozy and warm it is, suggesting they just stay in bed. But right then, Sebastian appears out of nowhere telling him not to move, sending Crow bolting upright as he gasps out the butler's name. While he's gearing up, Seabass drops the day's itinerary. First, Kentucky's got an urgent report on Lalabella waiting at the breeding grounds. And then, the village's outer wall is officially done, so Crosama needs to go inspect their hard work. Crow gave a quick nod and took off, heading straight for the breeding grounds without wasting a single second. They step out into the fresh air where Diana greets him with a grin and declares that it's finally time to go hunting. Diana practically begged Rose to tag along, but Rose just barked at her to give her some space, leaving Cross to watch with a nervous grin as he realized Rose has been absolutely smothered in love since the moment Diana arrived. We're dropping right into the heart of the Lalabella bird breeding grounds, Kentucky shouted out in total hype, pointing out that they'd finally managed to tame the savage law of Bella Bird. Wait, for real? Crow shouted in disbelief. But secretly, he was panicking because he knew male Alabella birds were way more aggressive than the females, and that healing grass only made the beast go absolutely nuclear, breathing fire and trashing everything in its path. Kentucky explains they've been using both healing and detox herbs, which hits Crow with a sudden realization. Since detox grass is the core ingredient for antidotes, eating it raw might actually be the secret. Crow suddenly flashed back to Virdo's lesson on how antidotes can instantly sober up a drunkard. And since low-grade detox grass is the key ingredient, he realized this stuff was the secret to shutting down the male Lalabella bird's insane aggression. Koto tells Kentucky it's finally time to start hunting down female Lalabella birds for breeding, but warns him to stay sharp against their lethal fire breath while they set up the fireproof coops, to which Kentucky just smirks and tells him he's got it handled. Crow grinned with pure satisfaction, muttering that they could finally kick off their new hustle, while a confused Seabass asked him what the heck he meant by a new business. Crow explains that Lalabella meat is a total delicacy, while their feathers and eggs are straight-up luxury goods, meaning if they can crack the code on farming them, every town in the land will be dying to get their hands on some. But he wasn't finished. Raising Lalabella birds meant he'd have to start growing his own medicinal herbs, specifically healing and detox grass. But to actually grow those herbs, they needed an alchemist who could flood the entire field with raw magical power. So he pitched a brilliant plan. Send over a Nest Village alchemist and rake in the cash from dispatch fees in those fireproof rooster houses. And just like that, the ultimate master plan for his new empire was born. Seabass instantly agreed, knowing that plan was absolute genius. He pointed out the real challenge. Could they actually raise these magical beasts safely outside the village? Crow totally agreed and suggested they kick things off with a trial run in Red Village. Last time they struck a deal, the Red Village felt so indebted for those top-tier veggies that they decided to start up some Bellabird racing, and Crow was totally fired up to help them make it happen. Seabass suggests they deploy alchemists from Nest Village for now, and Crow's totally on board, but he insists Kinaru tags along as backup just to be safe. Once this test proves successful, he's taking the news straight to his old man to pitch a massive expansion across the entire El Dorado territory. Seabass points out they've already got the green light to raise the Lalabella birds, but the final verdict is all down to those test results. He gave a firm nod, promising to hash the details out with Kinaru, while Crow made sure to show his appreciation. And just like that, the Lalabella bird breeding program is officially kicking into high gear. Right by the massive outer walls, Crow bellows over to Jimmy, demanding to know if the construction is finally finished. That brutal showdown with the swamp lizard man was still fresh in Crow's mind, driving him to turn the village into a total fortress by stacking even more security on top of his alchemist and golem surveillance team. He knew the village needed some serious protection, so he made the executive decision to double the size of their defensive walls. He put his alchemists on the job, letting them put their rapidly leveling skills to the test by forging this massive new outer barrier. Jimmy confirms the alchemist has leveled up, and they're absolutely crushing their tasks without breaking a sweat, with the gate construction moving so fast it'll be finished in just 2 days. Crow gave a sincere thanks, but Jimmy was already hyping up their potion progress. Then he suddenly remembered and blurted out that Marika had finally brewed a legendary A-rank recovery potion, leaving Crow absolutely floored. Jimmy reveals that Marika's been brewing potions like a machine day and night without a wink of sleep, and Crow finally realizes that's the secret behind their massive stockpile. He decided it was time to step in and tell her she desperately needed some shut-eye. Her drive was legendary, but even the strongest warriors will crash if they don't recharge. Jimmy even cornered him, practically begging him to handle the situation before she burned out. Jimmy let out a quick sigh and cracked a grin, realizing it wasn't just Marika. Every single alchemist there was finally fired up and ready to go. He explains that before arriving here, alchemists were treated like total garbage, mocked as bottom-tier mages who could only brew potions while everyone else looked down on them. To make matters worse, C-rank potions were dirt cheap, and even pumping them out in bulk barely turned a profit, forcing alchemists to pick up side hustles just to stay afloat. They were totally backed into a corner, with zero time to even practice those high-paying B-rank potions, leaving their progress completely dead in the water. Crow goes dead silent as Jimmy spills the harsh truth. Even as a lucky solo alchemist, he's still drowning in debt, clenching his fist as those bitter memories come rushing back. A crowd of kids gathered nearby, and one little girl's jaw hit the floor in total shock. The group showered Alchemist San with gratitude for coming through when they needed him most. Jimmy flashes them a quick wave back, but right as he does, a voice suddenly calls out his name. They invited him to join the feast, and after Jimmy nervously double-checked if it was actually okay, he thanked them so sincerely that the woman couldn't help but giggle. She talked about how he was always grinding in the fields and even scouting the dangerous wilds outside, while another woman chimed in that he worked his heart out for everyone. This village is basically dead in the water without the alchemist backing them up. Jimmy's jaw hits the floor the second he hears those words. He poured his heart out, admitting that finally being needed and appreciated by everyone felt like a total dream come true. He poured his heart out, thanking Krosama for finally giving them a real reason to hope, while Jimmy's face lit up with a massive ear-to-ear grin. Crow locked eyes with him and smirked, admitting those were the exact words he'd been dying to hear. He realized that outside of just brewing potions, the entire field of alchemy had basically been left to rot in the dust. This was the ultimate win-win, steering everything toward a golden future where Nest Village keeps booming and alchemists finally get the respect they deserve. That sounds like a plan. But right then, a messenger sprints toward them, screaming at the top of his lungs. Lord Crow, disaster has struck! Just a few dozen miles to the northeast, a pack of orcs has been spotted and they're making a beeline straight for our heroes. Crow's jaw hits the floor as pure shock washes over him. Were they actually planning to raid Nest Village? Looking at the timing, they were probably just out to pillage enough food to survive the winter. If that was true, Nest Village was basically a sitting duck. Crow didn't waste a second, demanding to know exactly how many of these things they were dealing with. The man just shook his head, admitting that, honestly, there were way too many to even count. But there were easily over 1,000 of them, and he let out a heavy gulp as the sheer scale of the threat finally hit him. These things were armed to the teeth and decked out in full battle armor. They aren't just moving, they're marching out like they're headed straight for the front lines. The Nest Village Plaza was absolutely packed as the entire town crowded together. Crow addresses the crowd, giving a massive shout-out to everyone for finally banding together. He assumed they'd already caught wind of it, but a massive orc army is currently storming straight toward Nest Village. Crow explains that orcs are basically giant, upright pig monsters who are total pushovers alone. But the second they swarm, their power level spikes to a deadly C rank. But it gets even scarier. We're talking genius-level orc generals and kings who actually have the brains to match their brawn. And when these heavy hitters take charge, they transform a mindless mob into a terrifying organized war machine. They patched up their glaring weaknesses and transformed into a stone-cold squad of disciplined warriors. Crow wasn't finished yet, dropping the bombshell that the Orc King has a broken skill that massively buffs the stats of his entire army. This kind of leadership basically bumps the entire pack up a whole rank. And while the group isn't sure if they're facing an orc general or a king, all signs are pointing toward the king himself. Crow sizes up the massive orc horde and realizes running away is a total death trap. So he tells everyone to dig in because their only choice is to stand their ground and fight. He knew the only way they'd make it out alive was to band together and fight as one. The crowd was paralyzed with shock at first, but that hesitation vanished in a heartbeat as their resolve hardened into pure steel. Out of nowhere, a voice cracks the silence, admitting they're absolutely terrified. But if it means staying alive, they're ready to do whatever it takes. Another man steps up, shouting that he's putting his faith in everyone to hold the line, and the whole crowd roars back, ready to fight for their home until the bitter end. Pro kicked things into high gear, demanding they start preparations right this second. He put Jimmy in charge of the fortification unit, telling him to burn through as many recovery potions as it takes to get everyone ready. Jimmy didn't even flinch, confidently telling Pro to leave the whole thing in his hands. Crow ordered Marika to juice up the Golem's mana and take the lead, and she didn't miss a beat, replying with a sharp, "Yes, Lord Crow!" Crow immediately orders the hunting squad to salvage the black buffalo's bones, aiming to forge them into some powerful new bows and arrows. The team gives him a sharp nod, totally locked in and ready to work. But just as they're about to start, a voice suddenly shouts out to Crow from right behind him. It was Chichikaka! Crow Gaston's jaw hit the floor as he barked out his name in total disbelief. Chikaka made it crystal clear. If Nest Village goes down, the Kapoka tribe is toast, so they're jumping into the fight. And after a heavy silence, Crow finally gave the nod. As the chaos erupted, he rallied the villagers to fight by his side, telling Chichikaka to have the hunters keep the arrows coming while the alchemists rushed over the potions. Chichikaka gives a cocky nod, telling them he's got this handled, just as another voice shouts out to Crow. Nor and Virdo stepped up side by side, declaring they were jumping into the fray to back them up. Virdo stepped up, taking full charge of the crafting and making sure every bow was strung and ready for war. Crows flashed a confident grin, giving a huge shout-out to the team for their hard work. He promised that as soon as the gear was set, he'd break down the entire master plan for the upcoming battle. Right after that, the orcs started closing the distance. He's already got a whole crowd of them lined up right in his crosshairs. Seabass gave Crow-sama the green light, confirming the entire squad was officially ready for war. Against all odds, they even finished upgrading the moat just before the deadline. And let's be real, they owe it all to the insane power of those potions. Crow smirked as their counterattack finally fell into place. Now all that was left was to pull the trigger. The goal slammed its hands into the dirt, vaulted clean over the wall, and stuck a perfect landing on the other side. The villagers' jaws hit the floor in absolute disbelief. Crow roared at the top of his lungs that they were ready to throw down. The entire squad stepped up and delivered some seriously massive results. He lets out a massive yes at the top of his lungs. The golem's eyes flared with a lethal glow. A split second later, it exploded forward, charging straight for the enemy line. The orcs let out a panicked roar as they scrambled to mount a defense. Giganto the Golem charges headfirst into the fray, absolutely obliterating every orc in his path. The orcs shrieked in pure agony as crimson sprayed across the battlefield. A massive plume of dust kicked up around the Golem, swallowing the stone beast whole. Crow's mind started racing as he desperately plotted his next move. This massive Golem is built different, swelling its feet to gargantuan sizes to flatten orcs by the dozen, while jagged spikes on its soles turn every stomp into absolute carnage. All right, time to find the big boss. But as Crow peers through his scope, his jaw hits the floor when he spots a massive behemoth and realizes he might be staring down an actual orc general. But the rest of the orc horde isn't waiting around. They charge straight into the heat of battle. Crow realized they were trying to flank the massive Golem and screamed that it wouldn't work. But the archers were already letting a lethal storm of arrows fly. He lunges straight into the heart of the massive horde, but those orcs aren't budging and stonewall his strike completely. He just scoffs, mocking him for that absolutely pathetic excuse for an attack. Out of nowhere, a massive fist slams down and absolutely obliterates the orc's face. This massive Golem suddenly launches itself straight into the sky. He slammed into the dirt at breakneck speed as Jimmy roared at the defenders to hold the line and keep those orcs away from the village. Those golems aren't slowing down for a second, absolutely pulverizing orc skulls one after another. Crow knew the Giganto Golem couldn't afford to buckle now. They had to take down that orc general immediately, or their only window for victory would slam shut. A thunderous roar of command suddenly rips through the air. Looming right behind his legion of troops, the orc general makes his entrance. In a heartbeat, every single orc snaps their focus straight toward the massive Giganto Golem. They charged in without a second thought, but got absolutely flattened in the blink of an eye. Another wave of orcs charges head-on, but before they can even touch the Giganto Golem, they're punted back and absolutely crushed. But as the fight drags on, a few orcs actually reach the Giganto Golem, swarming up its massive body like a plague of ants. The giant tried to lash out, but he was instantly swallowed by the sheer weight of their numbers. While the rest of the orcs are busy brawling with a literal army of golems, Jimmy starts to lose it, screaming that they're completely swarmed and backup won't make it in time. And if this keeps up... The orcs actually pulled it off, swarming up and claiming their spot right on the Giganto Golem's back. The giant snatched them up and crushed them to bits, but another orc just sneers as he slams his blade against the golem's massive body. Surveying the carnage from a distance, the orc general growled out a command in his deep, gravelly voice. Crow hissed a curse, realizing the situation was turning south fast. They're swarming it with a massive mob, using sheer numbers to suffocate the beast. Pinned down like that, the poor thing can't even find the room to budge. And did he finally lose his mind? Oh, you better believe he snapped. Forget moving like a human. The golem just forces its entire body to manifest out of thin air. It violently hurls off every single orc that was desperately clinging to its body. A woman let out a sharp gasp at the carnage, while another shouted that the orcs were vaporized in a split second, all as Krosa's face contorted, while he finally realized the name of that devastating move. Giganto Hurricane! The giganto-golem spins its massive frame like a violent cyclone, tossing orcs into the air like absolute rag dolls. Marika screams for everyone to follow Krosama's lead, commanding the golems to hold their formation and advance as one tight unit while another alchemist roars back in agreement. Right then, you order the archers to rain down hell so the golems can tear through the enemy with ease. The men roar back a thunderous, "Yes, sir!" A confident smirk spreads across Crow's face. "All right, let's keep this momentum going. Let's give it everything we've got!" he roars, as the giganto-golem's eyes flare with a deadly light once more. Marika flashes a wicked smirk while Sebastian stands there frozen, his jaw on the floor as he watches the absolute carnage unfold. Right at that second, Rose and Diana dive headfirst into the heat of the battle. While the front lines are absolute chaos, the villagers and lizardmen are working overtime to keep the arrows and potions flowing. The golem absolutely levels an orc with a crushing punch to the face, even as Sniper stays completely locked into the heat of the game. Seabass and the other mages finally let loose, raining magical destruction down on the rest of the horde. That giganto-golem kept right on spinning like a massive hurricane, launching orcs into the sky like absolute ragdolls. Crow watched the chaos, satisfied his team was crushing it, before whipping his scope around to track the enemy's every move. His jaw hit the floor as he spotted a familiar face hiding among the orcs. It was the one and only Chief Barjo. Meanwhile, Arjo was absolutely seething, replaying every single disaster that dragged him into this mess. He'd once sat his kin down to trade legends about the mysterious East Forest. He'd heard rumors of a massive swamp nearby, the ultimate hideout to bring the Dauphin tribe back to their former glory. The problem was, a massive orc settlement was already sitting right in that forest. His people were freaking out, arguing that the orcs would never let them pass, but Barjo just looked them in the eye and said that's exactly why they had to bet their lives on this one desperate gamble. If they wanted any chance at winning, they absolutely needed that one kid's insane power. With winter breathing down their necks, they needed a massive stockpile of food, and that nearby village was the perfect target for a raid. He'd already felt that kid's insane power in battle, and he knew that if they backed him up with the orcs' military might, victory was basically a done deal. Barjo smirked as everything fell perfectly into place, knowing those starving orcs were desperate enough to swallow his deal just to survive the winter. They're rolling up with a massive army of 20,000 soldiers. Wiping out those kids would be a total cakewalk, but that cocky brat has been pulling the strings this whole time, and now everything is going exactly according to his plan. Shaking with fear, Barjo spat out a curse, realizing his perfect plan had just turned into a total nightmare. He never dreamed a goal could be this freaking massive, and behind him, a lizard man was already losing his mind, panicking over how they were even supposed to handle something that huge. Barjo snaps, barking at his troops to shut their mouths and keep their heads in the game. With 20,000 orcs at their back, they've got all the muscle they need to win. If they just swarm the enemy and crush them with sheer numbers, victory is practically guaranteed. Meanwhile, Crow is watching the chaos unfold from the shadows, his face turning grim as he takes it all in. Seabass caught the sudden shift in his master's expression and asked what was wrong, only for Crow to drop a bombshell. There was a swamp lizard man hiding right in the middle of the orc army. It looks like he's the one who actually unleashed this entire nightmare. He falls dead silent under the crushing weight of the moment, only to be jolted back by a stinging slap to his back. Rose's sheer defiance snapped him out of his dark spiral, making it crystal clear that the lizard man had sold them out, leaving them with no choice but to tear through the orcs, too. She was about to show those fools exactly why they should have never crossed her path. With no way to take back those feelings, they had only one choice left: crush every single enemy standing in their way. His voice drops to sub-zero as he vows to crush that ungrateful swamp lizard with a massive iron fist. You just listen with the faint smirk while the others silently lock in their resolve, and Crow finally steps up to answer the call to war. He roared with every ounce of his soul, vowing that they were going to absolutely obliterate the enemy. Rose flashed a satisfied grin, thrilled to see him finally acting like his old self again. The clock was ticking, and according to the master plan, it was almost showtime. She calls forth Diana, vowing to dive down and personally shred the enemy's ranks, while Diana locks in with ironclad resolve and Crow shouts for them to stay alive. He barked orders to the other alchemists to back those two up with the golem if things got dicey, and the crew roared back in perfect sync, their resolve absolutely rock solid. Right in the thick of the chaos, 3 orcs swarmed the golem from every angle. The lead orc lunges in for the kill, but before he can even land a hit, the golem buries a massive fist into his gut, absolutely pulverizing him. 2 more orcs lunged for a backstab, but they didn't even get the chance to swing. Rose shreds through them in the blink of an eye. Blood sprayed across the dirt in a violent arc, and Rose immediately pivoted to face the rest of the orc pack. She flashes a cocky smirk, basically daring the monsters to make a move. And just like that, the entire horde of orcs loses it and charges straight for her. But Diana lunged in and completely cut them off. Diana threw herself in front of the danger to shield Rose, and without a single word, Rose put her entire life in Diana's hands. The duo dives headfirst into the mob, their blades blurring in perfect sync as they drop enemies left and right. Crow's watching from the sidelines, and while the duo seems to be holding their own, he's got a bad feeling in his gut because his whole plan was to use that massive golem to absolutely crush the enemy commander. But if he moves now, their entire defensive line is going to crumble into dust. He's caught in a silent panic, agonizing over the impossible choice. He's desperately searching for any way out of this nightmare. Right then, Robbie's voice slices through the tension. Crow nearly jumped out of his skin, gasping in shock as that sudden call caught him totally off guard. He bolted straight to Robbie's side, desperate to see if his friend was still in one piece. Out of nowhere, Ravi's tiny frame explodes with a blinding surge of pure radiant light. Crow's winced, his eyes burning as he struggled to peer through that blinding white-hot glare. Every ounce of magic was being vacuumed up, swallowed whole by the radiance. Ravi's entire frame is shaking uncontrollably, practically vibrating apart as that light surges into a blinding roar. Yored stood frozen to the spot, while Seabass 2's eyes nearly popped out of his head as he let out a sharp gasp of pure disbelief. Their allies stood there frozen in shock, unable to even blink as they watched the laws of reality shatter right in front of them. And then, emerging from that blinding aura, inside that blinding glow, Robbie's tiny frame starts ballooning up, and right before their eyes, the little pup evolves into a massive glowing titan radiating pure power. Everyone's jaws hit the floor, and even Crow was left reeling when he saw that Ravi had transformed into a literal titan. Ravi let out a savage growl before unleashing a bone-chilling howl. The rest of the group was left whispering in total shock, staring at the massive growth of Larabia, and wondering how on earth something like this could even happen. Crow flexed his hand in disbelief, the terrifying reality hitting him that Ravi was literally feeding on his power to grow stronger. Ravi steps into the fray, letting out a low, savage growl that means business. He goads Seabass into finally drawing his blade while Ravi snarls with savage fury. But instead of going for the kill, he catches everyone off guard by giving Crow a massive lick right across the face. But even though his physical body had undergone a massive transformation, Crow stepped in to settle their nerves, swearing that deep down, Ravi was still the same guy they always knew. The tension finally snapped as everyone breathed a sigh of relief, but then Ravi hit the deck and started groveling for his life. Crow stood there completely dazed, wondering if Ravi was actually telling him to hop on for a high-speed ride straight into the war zone. Seabass immediately pushed back, swearing that there was no way they could send their lord into a place like that. He was ready to jump into the action himself, but Ravi just shook his head and shut him down. Crow could tell Ravi was counting on him, so he brushed off Seabass's warnings and promised not to overdo it. He swore that the second things got dicey, he'd turn right back around. And just like that, they announce it's finally time to hit the road. Ravi kicks it into high gear, lunging forward at breakneck speed. Guess who's back? They're hauling Kroon right back into the heat of the battle. Crow scopes out the horizon and catches the orcs lurking in the distance. He barked at Ravi to keep charging straight ahead. But the second he saw the sheer scale of that massive horde, he realized he was in way over his head. His jaw hit the floor as he realized he was staring down a massive, endless wave of enemies. He locked and loaded his airgun, ready to blast every single one of them into oblivion. But before he can even make a move, Ravi charges straight into the fray all on his own. He's absolutely tearing through the orc horde like they're made of paper. A massive swing came crashing toward them, but Ravi moved like lightning and slipped right past it. He'd already torn right through the entire horde, leaving Crow absolutely stunned by his sheer speed. Finally, they locked eyes with the work general himself. And then we've got the legendary York Steerdatham entering the spotlight. Crow leaps off his ride, landing on his feet and ready for action. He's done playing games, so he channels every drop of his refining power to unleash the devastating Grand Needle. Before anyone could blink, jagged spikes burst straight out of the ground. He's skewering those orcs and dropping them where they stand. Ravi jerks his head up, signaling the orc general who comes flying in with a murderous leap. He lunges straight for Crow, and even Crow is blown away by that massive leap. But with just a flick of his wrist, those orcs are suddenly frozen mid-air like they hit an invisible wall. He triggers Crowbound and lets loose a massive Eastrise Megatron air cannon. The explosion sends the general flying, only for a massive spike to burst from the ground and skewer him, ending his life right then and there. Crow swipes the sweat from his brow, the pressure finally starting to show. Everyone finally lets out a massive sigh of relief now that the boss is officially toast. But the chaos didn't stop there, as the fight exploded into an absolute war zone. The orcs weren't falling apart, proving their king was still calling the shots. so Crow wasted no time leaping back onto Ravi. As they're blitzing forward, Crow shouts over to Ravi, asking if he can sense the king's presence yet. Ravi skidded to a dead stop. Suddenly, Crow caught sight of a mysterious figure lurking right behind the orcs. He was an absolute unit, looming over everything with eyes that burned like literal hellfire. Enter the Orc King, a B-rank beast wielding the broken hegemony skill, a power that sinks his entire army's stats, forcing them to keep fighting for 2 days straight without a single second of rest. The more warriors he gathers, the more their power skyrockets, potentially launching this monster all the way to an A or even S-rank threat. Diving into that endless sea of orcs was pure suicide, especially since every monster he dropped only fueled the enemy's growing power. Crow slams his palm into the dirt, instantly triggering his refining powers. Those spikes blast forward, shredding the air like a barrage of stone bullets. The hits are landing, and even though the spell isn't lethal, it's doing a perfect job of stopping them dead in their tracks. But the Orc King didn't hesitate for a second, barreling straight toward him with everything he had. The monster didn't give a damn about its own men, carving a path right through them as Crow watched in total shock at the ruthless slaughter of its own army. He instantly snapped into a guard, chanting the first key to refine his earth-rent defense. Lightning slammed into the ground to form a massive energy barrier, but the Orkings didn't even flinch as they tore right through it. He smashes right through that earth wall like it's made of glass. Ravi lets out a feral growl, but the Orc King just stares him down with ice-cold indifference, until Ravi finally snaps and hurls himself at the monster. He sinks his teeth deep into its shoulder, locking his jaws tight. Crow shouted out just as the orc let loose a thunderous roar of pure rage. Ravi tosses Raviath aside like a rag doll and immediately snaps back into a solid fighting stance. But right before their eyes, the orcs wrapped themselves in their cloaks and completely vanished into thin air. Crow and Ravi's jaws hit the floor as the Orc King shook off the damage and hauled himself back up. Was it some kind of high-level magic, or was this monster just healing that fast on its own? This demon was a total freak of nature, way more dangerous than anything Crow had prepared for. That's when it clicked. This creature was hiding a much darker secret. With its wounds completely healed, the Orc King towered over Crow, looking more dangerous than ever. As the orc horde starts swarming in, Crone clocks their movements instantly. The foot soldiers are already rallying for another round. He toyed with the idea of falling back to Nest Village to regroup, but he knew that dragging this out only played into the orc's hands. It was time to end this right here, right now. Robbie Beard flashes that iconic jagged grin as the diamonds encrusting his body start snapping off into razor-sharp shards that he blasted straight at the orc horde. Those shards tear through the targets before they can even blink. The entire organization just got encased in solid crystal. While Robbie kept the soldiers pinned down, Crow zeroed in on the big boss himself, the Orc King. The Orc King hoisted his massive weapon, ready to crush everything in its path. Crow realized in an instant that if the beast closed the gap, he was dead meat. If he couldn't keep his distance, he was just going to keep getting pummeled into the dirt. He unleashes his mana, refining the Grand Needle into a weapon of pure destruction. A forest of jagged spikes erupted from the floor, but the Orc Kings just bulldozed through them like they were made of glass. Crow dives back in, obsessively refining his technique until it's absolutely flawless. He unleashed the Megatron air cannon, sending a massive blast screaming straight toward the orc. But just like that, he completely shuts that blast down. Once again, those legendary Eagles are summoned back into the fray. But they got absolutely pulverized once more, and the next assault hit them before they could even catch their breath. A spike drives straight into the orc's eye, and the beast lets out a deafening roar while clutching its face in agony. Crow just mutters to himself, realizing that even a monster as tough as the Orc King isn't immune to a well-placed shot to the socket. Even with one eye blown out, the monster gripped its weapon tighter and kept charging forward. It slammed into the earth with a bone-shaking impact. The entire battlefield started to quake with raw power. Ravi dug his heels in, bracing for the absolute worst. The Orc King reached down and ripped one of Crow's spikes right out of the dirt. He whipped it around and rocketed it straight toward his face. The weapon slams into Crow's neck, and a jolt of white-hot agony surges through his entire body. Robbie lets out a feral growl the moment Crow spots that nasty spike buried deep in his leg. He forced it out through sheer willpower, snatched a recovery potion, and dumped it straight into the open wound. Robbie's eyes snap wide as he lets out a low growl, sensing a sudden threat. The Orc King brought his massive weapon crashing down, aiming to flatten them right where they stood. Robbie doesn't waste a single second, unleashing another lethal storm of diamond shards. They run their blades right through the beast, but this orc refuses to go down. Robbie stood his ground and charged right into the danger. But in the blink of an eye, a blinding flash of light swallowed him whole. In a flash, his massive frame withered away until he was stuck back in his tiny, pint-sized form. Crow claps Ravi on the back, thanking him for fighting like a total beast and letting him know he's finally done enough. Now he's finally unleashing Ravi's ice to put the absolute chill on his enemies. The Orc King explodes forward, closing the distance in a flash. Crow doesn't even budge, chanting his heart out right where he stands. He's refining his power to the absolute limit. He unleashes I-Soul USH, sending massive spikes surging across the entire battlefield. Those jagged shards hover for a split second before diving straight into its flesh. But the war didn't care. It just kept charging ahead like an unstoppable beast. With his weapon hoisted high, Crow yanked Ravi right up to his face, staring him down with absolute intensity. Suddenly, a strange sound catches the orc's ear, making him whip his head around in an instant. In the distance, thundering footsteps shook the ground as a massive silhouette finally loomed into view. Suddenly, a massive figure comes barreling straight at them. He unleashed Crossmild, the trump card he'd prepped just for this moment. And even though it left Nest Village totally exposed, he knew this was a gamble he had to take. The Orc King stood there paralyzed with fear before ditching his weapon and hauling tail out of there. Crow realized that if they could just take down the Orc King, this entire war would finally be history. He's closing the gap at lightning speed, and everything he's been chasing is finally within his grasp. That massive fist comes crashing down, absolutely hammering the orc into the dirt. He sends that monster hurtling through the air. The golem tracked the orcs right to their landing zone, only to find a whole second squad already waiting for them. The second he locked eyes with that massive, towering behemoth. The orcs ditched their weapons in a total panic and scrambled away like their lives depended on it. As the dust finally settled on the battlefield, Crow let out a heavy breath before his body completely gave out, and he collapsed right there next to Ravi. He let out a shaky breath, whispering in pure relief that his insane gamble had actually paid off. Crow is just lying there in the dirt, his eyes shut tight as he stays completely motionless. With agonizing slowness, he finally pried him wide open. He spots Ravi watching him in total silence, a chilling reminder that he's still got some serious unfinished business to take care of. Meanwhile, over by the river, the Lizardman army is already on the move. One of them spat out curses over the Orc King's total defeat, muttering that if a certain brat finds out what happened, they're all dead meat. They froze dead in their tracks as the trees began to rustle. And suddenly, Crow stepped right out of the shadows to block their path. It's been a hot minute since he last went toe-to-toe with Balgeo. Crow had already laid down the law. If he ever dared to break their promise, Crow wouldn't think twice about absolutely crushing him. The second Balgeo caught sight of Crow, his knees buckled from pure terror. He's down on his knees begging for mercy, swearing the orc forced his hand and he never actually wanted to throw down. Crow didn't even flinch. But as Balgeo sized him up, he spotted a massive opening the second Crow turned his back. Balgeo snatches up his weapon and lunges forward, dead set on ending the fight right then and there. But right before that fist could even make contact, out of nowhere a lethal strike blindsided Balgeo, skewering him right through the side. The dagger slipped right through his fingers, clattering uselessly against the stone. Crow barked out that he wasn't falling for the same pathetic trick a second time. The rest of the lizard men just stood there frozen, their jaws hitting the floor in pure shock. Blood sprays everywhere as Crow clenches his fist, sending massive earth spikes erupting from the ground to skewer every last one of them. Crow locked in and swore right then and there that he'd never lose his way again. Meanwhile, Rose was busy tearing through the chaos, launching herself into the sky and splitting her enemy right down the middle with one lethal flashing strike. She spins around to find a whole new wave of enemies, but once they see what she's capable of, they completely lose their nerve and bolt in pure terror. Off in the distance, Rose and Diana spotted a massive silhouette looming over the horizon. The second they stepped into view, the crowd went absolutely ballistic, screaming their lungs out for Crow and the massive golem at his side. People broke down in tears, screaming at the top of their lungs because they just pulled off a miracle victory no one saw coming. Even the brothers finally exhaled in relief as the moment arrived, while Diana just couldn't hold it back anymore, breaking down into total sobs. Crow shouted that the hunt was officially on, ordering his golem unit to mount up and drive the surviving orcs straight into the magic forest. Rose was stunned by the sheer audacity of him taking on the Orc King solo, but she still gave the madman a wave as he charged into the fray. Crow returned the signal, they shared a crisp high five, and then they both split up. Jimmy barks out the command, telling his golem squad to lock and load for the incoming fight. The moment Crow gave the signal, they vaulted onto their horses and the hunt was officially on. The Crow's group stays hot on the orcs' heels, hunting them down. He's dropping them left and right, and Crow, he steps up and absolutely levels one with a single devastating punch. He followed up by burying a brutal fist straight into the next guy's gut. One by one, the orcs started dropping like flies. Panic paralyzed the rest of the group as they shot each other terrified looks. They broke ranks and bolted, vanishing into the shadows before anyone could even blink. When the dust finally settled, All 3,000 orcs had been herded straight into the heart of the magic forest, because those high-ranking demons would absolutely slaughter every last one of them. The weary survivors start hauling the bodies onto their carts, clearing the field of their fallen comrades. Crow wonders if they should strip the bodies for materials, but Nord drops a bombshell. Why not just turn them into dinner? Crow was stunned, asking if the meat was actually delicious. But Nord confirmed it was top-tier stuff, with the internal organs being the real prize. Nest Village is absolutely booming with new immigrants, so a haul of high-grade meat like this is a total game-changer for them. The very next morning, the orc meat was prepped and ready to be served as the ultimate offering for the grand feast. The crows took center stage, shouting at the top of their lungs that today was the day they finally claimed their victory. He thrust his mug into the air and roared out a toast for everyone to hear. The owl brother was yapping his head off while a guest nearby slammed his mug down with a heavy thud. He kicked back and cheered, declaring that nothing beats a cold drink in the middle of the day. The old man let out a satisfied sigh, declaring that this stew was still the absolute goat. It was packed with savory orc meat, making it the ultimate snack for any hungry warrior. Meanwhile, Rose is over here living her absolute best life, totally lost in food heaven as she devours her meal. She finally admitted the orc meat was actually fire, and Diana agreed it was a total delicacy. But then Rose caught a whiff of a scent so strong it stopped her in her tracks. Driven by pure curiosity, she decided to tail the mystery and see exactly where it was headed. And Diana's right there by her side, backing her up. Decent leads the way to a food stall, and boom. That's where they finally track down Crow. East is grinding away behind the counter, totally focused on bringing his latest creation to life. He revealed his secret weapon, a brand new dish he'd whipped up to look just like a plate of pasta. Behold the Port Bonaraman, a wild feast cooked up using nothing but massive orc bones and a heap of fresh veggies. He'd been brewing detox grass since last night, desperate to scrub that foul stench away. He spiked the mix with all those secret extracts, turning it into a thick, legendary broth that was bursting with flavor. It's crowned with succulent orc meat chasu that melts instantly on your tongue, paired with a rich, golden half-boiled egg from a massive lorry bird. Crow's absolutely demolishing his ramen, savoring every single bite like it's a total masterpiece. That rich, runny yolk melts right on his tongue as he slurps those noodles down effortlessly. He slammed it back, the flavor profile finally hitting its peak, before rising to his feet and licking his lips in total satisfaction. He's got this completely shell-shocked look written all over his face. He glances over and catches Rose tracking his every move. With a mountain of food still left over, he invited Diana to dig in as well, and Rose couldn't help but beam at the gesture. Marika scanned the crowd and realized everyone else was having an absolute blast right along with her. Enter the one and only Rose Diana. Even the Allbrothers dive right in, slurping down those piping hot noodles with absolute joy. While everyone else is busy getting hammered, our guys don't touch a single drop. Over at one of the tables, Crozat is posted up and chilling with Rose and Diana. He finally broke down and admitted that the food was straight up fire. Seabass, who was chilling right there, leaned in and asked if he was finally full. And with a satisfied grin, Croc gave him a big, hell yeah. Only to realize with a massive shock that it was actually Seabass doing the talking. Seabass cornered him, ready to give him an earful about that insane solo stunt he pulled yesterday. Crow tries to pivot the conversation by whining about his craving for meat, but Seabass just shuts him down, assuring him that everything is totally under control. The couple with Seabass revealed they'd brought a special stash of food for Crow, packing a mountain of liver to help him recover after that bloody showdown with the Orc King. Seabass casually suggested they take their sweet time and chat while they slowly feasted on some liver. Crow's face contorted in pure disgust as he shrieked for backup, but despite screaming for Rose and Diana, he was met with nothing but dead silence. He spins around to face Marika and she immediately starts tripping over herself to apologize. She actually downed the secret potion that was brewed specifically for Crow. Crow was absolutely stunned, immediately calling her out for being totally bought off. Seabass isn't backing down though, telling Crow to brace himself as he thrusts a forkful of liver right up to his lips. Crow scrambled away from the table in a total panic, but Seabass was right on his heels without missing a single beat.